More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Club's creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Easy Flow personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code TOM. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartmann. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Under the Influence, Putting Peer Pressure to Work by Robert H. Frank. And I'm reading from the prologue. That we are more closely connected to one another than most of us realize is an old idea. An important variation dates from 1929, when Hungarian writer Frigyes Karinthy published a short story entitled Chains. Two of the story's main characters speculate that any two living people can be connected by a chain involving no more than 5 acquaintances. That some such chains exist is hardly surprising, since most of us can think of people in distant locations to whom we're connected through a small number of intermediaries. The man bites dog aspect of Karinthy's conjecture is that almost any two people, A and E, could be linked by a chain like A knows B, B knows C, C knows D, who knows E. One of the first systematic attempts to test this claim came in the 1960s with a series of experiments by the psychologist Stanley Milgram. In it, he sent packages containing a small booklet to 96 people chosen at random from the Omaha, Nebraska telephone directory. His cover letter asked them to try to forward the booklet to a specific residence of Boston, Massachusetts, through a chain of personal acquaintances. He told them the name and address of the Boston resident, that he worked as a stockbroker, and that the first person in their chain should be somebody they knew on a first-name basis. Milgram also advised them to choose someone they believed, presumably based on the target's location and occupation, could be socially closer to the target than they were themselves. Subsequent recipients in the chain were asked to forward the same instructions. Many of the Omaha recipients undoubtedly tossed Milgram's booklet in the trash, so it's remarkable that the Boston target received 18 of the 96 packages. The average number of links in the 18 chains was 5.9. But the now familiar expression 6 degrees of separation would not gain broad currency until many years later, when John Guare's play by that name premiered on Broadway in 1990. The concept became a meme in full when 4 Albright College students introduced 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon in 1994, a game designed to measure the professional proximity of an actor, living or dead, to the American film star Kevin Bacon. An actor has a Bacon number of 1, for example, if he or she appeared in the same film with Bacon. Someone who appeared in a film with another actor who appeared in a film with Bacon has a Bacon number of 2, and so on. The average Bacon number is 2.95 among actors who have one. In that group, even the actor most distant from Bacon, William Rufus Shafter, has a Bacon number of only 7. Shafter, a Union Army officer during the Civil War, appeared in 2 films in 1898. For academics who study social connectedness, the 6 degrees concept gained little traction until 1998. That's when the sociologist Duncan Watts and the mathematician Steve Straga published their landmark paper, Collective Dynamics of Small World Networks in Nature. In the years since then, this paper has provided the mathematical foundation for the analytical tools that social scientists have been using with such remarkable success to study how ideas and behaviors spread through populations like infectious diseases. It has already been cited by other scholars more than 38,000 times and is one of the few papers ever published to be among the most widely cited works in multiple disciplines. In his 1976 book, The Selfish Gene, the evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins coined the term meme, which Webster now defines as an idea, behavior, style, or usage that spreads from person to person within a culture. The meme is to cultural transmission, Dawkins argued, as the gene is to biological transmission. One of Charles Darwin's central insights was that natural selection favors genetic variations that enhance the individual organism's ability to survive and reproduce. Much of the time, the same variations also benefit larger groups, but often not. For example, an inclination to cheat when no one's looking might benefit individuals, but widespread cheating almost always makes matters worse for groups. It is the same with memes. The memes that propagate most successfully are often ones that benefit both individuals and groups. But here too, not always. As the legal scholar Jeffrey Stake has argued, ideas should not be treated as inert products, but as living things that sometimes exert some influence over their environment. Some of the ideas are more adept at surviving than others, and the ones that survive will not necessarily be good for humans. It is often hard to evaluate whether a specific behavior even qualifies as a meme, and if so, whether its consequences on balance are positive or negative. Yet sometimes the evidence is clear. We know, for example, that the strongest predictor of whether people will take up smoking is the proportion of their close friends who smoke. Smoking is thus clearly a meme. The negative health consequences of smoking are also conclusively documented, and most smokers themselves express regret over having started. By definition, then, smoking unambiguously qualifies as a socially destructive meme. On the other side of the ledger, we have compelling evidence that the adoption of photovoltaic solar panels is both socially contagious and almost uniformly positive in terms of environmental consequences. Accordingly, few would object to calling the practice a socially beneficial meme. By a non-bureaucrat. Adam Smith, widely considered the father of economics, is often cited in defense of the claim that competitive markets produce the greatest good for the greatest number. The book is Under the Influence by Robert H. Frank.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy 420 is, it's National CBD Day or something like that. I mean, this used to be kind of Stoner's Day. But anyway, we've got a really big show for you today. The new big lie, the Republican big lie. The last one was Donald Trump won the election. That lie, still has its own life. There's a new lie that they're trying to get away with, and we can't let them get away with it. I'll get to that in just a minute. Anti-vaxxers say that the vaccinated are actually now fake GMO humans, and we've got a whole interesting story about that that'll be coming up in this first hour. In our second hour, John Vecchione is gonna drop by, and he's quite upset about Democrats talking about changing the Supreme Court, and we're gonna get into an interesting discussion on that. Debbie Hines is going to be with us on the Derek Chauvin trial. We're still waiting for the verdict to come in. The jury is still deliberating. But Debbie will be with us in about an hour and 30 minutes, thereabouts. And we'll see where we're at that point in time. And in our third hour, it is the 11th anniversary of the Deepwater Horizon blowout. And Greg Palast is going to be with us. Was the Deepwater Horizon actually a corporate homicide? And we've got a geeky science on red meat. Does it kill you? Interesting new research. So anyhow, all that stuff going on. 11 workers killed, 17 more injured in the Deepwater Horizon. Like I said, we'll get to that. But I wanted to start out with the big lie. Some Republicans are working rather aggressively to basically rewrite history. This is a 21st century version of the old Confederacy big lie, from the 19th century, from the 1800s. Only it even goes beyond the big lie that Donald Trump told, that he won the election when in fact he lost by 7 million votes. But now they're trying to sanitize treason as well. I laid this all out, and with all the links and everything over at HartmannReport.com this morning. You can read it there. No ads, it's free, all that kind of stuff. George Orwell famously pointed out that, and I quote, "Those who control the past control the future." This was the basis of the Reagan Legacy Project. Remember back in the day, after Reagan left office, a bunch of wealthy donors put together this thing where they got together and said, "Hey, let's put a statue of Ronald Reagan or name a building after Ronald Reagan in every single congressional district in America and every country in the world." And they did it. They pulled it off. And, just like we used to name buildings after Franklin Roosevelt because he was so beloved. I mean, that was just kind of a spontaneous thing. There was no big campaign funded by billionaires. Well, in this case, the billionaires funded the campaign and they got what they wanted. So now we're seeing that, this attempt to rewrite history has to do with January 6th. And this is no small thing. And these attempts to rewrite history actually can have, a huge consequence. I mean, there are still people who think that Ronald Reagan was a great president because his name's all over everything. Ronald Reagan was one of our absolute worst presidents. He presided over an economic disaster. He tripled the national debt. He raised taxes on working people 11 times. He taxed Social Security income. He taxed unemployment income. He destroyed labor unions. He gutted the middle class. He started two illegal wars in Central America that to this day are causing refugees to come to the United States. He cut a deal with the Iranians to sell them weapons in exchange for holding hostages so he could win an election. He committed treason. You could go on and on, all right? The whole Reaganomics thing, he turned the economy upside down. He created a whole generation of billionaires and wiped out much of the wealth of the American middle class. But the big lie of Reagan having a wonderful presidency lived on because of the Reagan Legacy Project. Well, I remember back in the 1980s, Louise and I moved to Atlanta, Georgia. I think it was 83 when we moved to Atlanta. And we started a business in suburban Atlanta, which did pretty well, actually. But what I most vividly remember about that period of time, our kids were all in elementary and junior high school at that point in time, was one night at dinner saying, "Well, so what'd you learn in school today?" And one of our kids said, "We learned about the War of Northern Aggression." And I'm like, "Really?" "Yeah, the New York bankers, they were robbing the South, and so the South had to fight back." Right. This is what happens when history is allowed to be rewritten for over a century. Keep in mind, we were, we were living in, and our kids were going to school in the Newt Gingrich's district in Marietta, Georgia. But that's what's happening again today. Over at the Washington Post, Mike Urbanus and Jeremy Barr and a few others wrote this remarkable piece. I put a couple quotes from it in today's piece over at Hartmann Report. Instead of an attempt to overturn the election, they wrote, by radicalized Donald Trump supporters, the attack on January 6th was actually a choreographed attack staged by Antifa provocateurs, rather than an armed insurrection. It was a good-natured protest spoiled by a few troublemakers. And instead of a deadly event that put the lives of hundreds of lawmakers, police officers, and others at risk, the riot was no big deal at all. This, again, from the Washington Post. A legion of conservative activists, they write, media personalities, and elected officials are seeking to rewrite the story of what happened at the Capitol on January 6th, hoping to undermine the clear picture of the attack that has emerged. 6 weeks after the attack, some are taking advantage of fading memories and unanswered questions to portray the riot in a different, more benign light. So now we have Democrats actually trying to put together a commission to look into what's going on. And basically at every effort, they're thwarted. Every time they try to put this thing together. Or, when the there's several different congressional committees that could be looking into this. And there's one small subcommittee that seems to be doing something. But basically every time the Democrats try to do anything, from subpoena somebody to whatever, the Republicans object to it and turn it into a whole procedural thing. And gee, it'll take a month to sort this one out. And so, we still don't know what happened. I mean, you've got this memo from Chris Miller, the Trump toady. Remember, after Trump lost the election, he basically decapitated the Pentagon, put a whole bunch of new people in the civilian positions in the Pentagon. Chris Miller was one of them. He wrote this memo on January 4th, 2 days before the attempt to end democracy in America, the coup d'etat, and said, without my subsequent personal authorization, the D.C. National Guard is not authorized to be issued weapons, ammunition, bayonets, batons, or other ballistic protection, to interact physically with protesters, to employ any riot control agents, to share equipment with law enforcement agencies, to use intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, to employ helicopters or other air assets, to conduct searches, seizures, arrests, or other similar law enforcement activity, or to support or to ask for support from any non-DC groups. So here's this news story. All right, and this new story is that, it was not a big deal. Oh, and if it was a big deal, it was Antifa and Black Lives Matter, and Maxine Waters was behind it. Honest to God. I mean, this is where these guys are going with this right now. It's Big Lie 2.0. Steve Scalise, the guy who campaigned saying he was David Duke without the baggage, the number 2 Republican. He's from Louisiana. He blasted Maxine Waters today. He said, because she had said, if the verdict comes back not guilty, we need to be in, a little more confrontational in the streets. And he's like saying, she's encouraging violence. And they said, well, what about, when Trump said, you got to fight like hell, go to the Capitol? He's like, oh, no, Trump never said that. No. Mo Brooks doesn't need to apologize for the speech that he gave. No. It's all that black woman, Maxine Waters. Yeah, that's what's going on. All right. This is version 2 of the Trump big lie, and it must not be allowed to stand. I mean, this is just a variation on the old Hitler big lie, and we just can't let them get away with it. We've got to point out what's going on. They are trying to rewrite. They're sanitizing.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
They are January 6th was an actual attempted coup d'etat. It was an attempt to end the government of the United States. We need to say it up front, say it out loud, and say it repeatedly. I mean, this is just incredible. Steve Scalise, he's, the Republican from Louisiana. He blasted Representative Maxine Waters, this David Edwards over at Raw Story today. She said that protesters in Minneapolis or in Minnesota should become more confrontational if former police officer Derek Chauvin is found not guilty in the death of George Floyd. And they had this Republican House leadership conference, and all of them were just like, oh my God, Maxine Waters said something. All it takes to make Republicans hysterical is for a black woman to say something. I mean, it has become that. A reporter suggested the Republican effort to expel or censure Waters was hypocritical because they refused to support a similar effort against Mo Brooks, who encouraged pro-Trump protesters minutes before they violently stormed the Capitol on January 6th. Scalise sidestepped the question about Brooks and used the opportunity to attack Waters. I have been very clear in speaking out against any kind of political rhetoric that incites violence, he said. The fact that Speaker Pelosi covered for her, she was trying to incite violence, and in fact, there is violence going on right now in Minnesota because of her actions. Right. People are upset in Minnesota, not because a white cop spent 9.5 minutes killing a black guy, an unarmed black man. That's not what they're upset about, according to David Duke without the baggage, Steve Scalise. No, what they're upset about is Maxine Waters told them to be upset. She's like the general who's giving orders to all these people who are out there, marching and speaking and all this kind of stuff. He goes on to say, I've been very clear in speaking out against any kind of political rhetoric that incites violence. The fact that Speaker Pelosi covered for her, she was trying to incite violence. And in fact, there is violence going on right now in Minnesota because of her actions. He says, I would like to see Maxine Waters apologize for the inflammatory comments that she's made inciting violence. She did not incite violence. Let's just be very clear about this. This is what Republicans do. Anytime you get even close to pointing out that these guys are complicit in an act of treason. And there's no other word that you can use to describe that. This was an act of treason. It was very, very straightforward. What's it going to take? What's it going to take for America to keep focused on, are they going to succeed? Is this going to be like the Reagan Legacy Project where, 10, 20 years from now, the story that's being told is not that Republicans tried to end the Republic, tried to end America, but rather that 20 years from now, the story is told that Maxine Waters and a bunch of other black Democrats tried to stir up a riot, or words to that effect. I mean, do you think they're going to be effective at it? Do you think it'll work? Are they going to be able to pull it off? I'm frankly a little skeptical, but hey, they're doing everything they possibly can right now. And right-wing media is right there with them. You got Tucker Carlson going, oh, it's not that big a deal. I mean, this is what's happening. And it seems that nobody is, taking it seriously. Nobody's really taking, paying close attention to this. So, but I am, and you should be too. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. There's so much news coming out of the Trump administration, so much corruption, so many crimes. Oh, now they're letting people kill endangered species. Now they're selling off, the Arctic National Wildlife Preserve, refuge rather, to big oil companies. Oh, now they're they're authorizing pesticides that we know cause birth defects and damage to children. It's just, step after step after step that it's so easy to forget that back in July of 2020, it was reported that Jared Kushner and Mike Pence's nephew, John Pence, created a couple of LLCs, American-Made Media Consultants Corporation, that took $617 million of Trump campaign cash, and nobody knows where it went. I'm telling you, these guys are professional grifters. We need to keep an eye on it. There's a whole rant about it over at ThomHartmann.com for supporters of our program. Back, Thom Hartmann here with you. Quite a lengthy, long live read there. Okay, the anti-vaxxers. The second story I want to share with you in this hour is about the anti-vaxxers, and they have gone nuts. I mean, they are the new claim. This is how crazy this is. But this has seized big chunks of like Facebook and other social media. I mean, it's out there, right? The word is out there that these vaccines cause genetic mutations. And, it's like distorting. Well, it's not even distorting the science. They're just lying. They're just making this stuff up. And it's got something to do with messenger RNA, and that must have something to do with DNA, and that must have something to do with genes. That must have to do something about genetic modification. No. But this message is being carried right now on Telegram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. According to the Daily Beast, they are reporting this. People who are vaccinated will have modified DNA, reads one meme, which compares the getting the shot to breeding sheep. No one discusses the DNA is passed on to the next generation. The risk that your children will marry into other cultures is possibly now shadowed by the fact that your children may marry into a COVID-vaxxed gene group, potentially shortening their lives and that of others. Right. So this is amazing. I mean, if you, I'm trying to figure out, how do we best communicate to these folks that, you really should get a vaccine, because we would like to save some lives here. We know beyond any doubt that people who are vaccinated don't die. They generally don't end up in hospitals. And in fact, literally 9 times out of 10, they don't even get infected. Now, they can still get infections rarely, and they may be contagious. We're still trying to figure that out. But so therefore, we still need to wear our masks even when we're vaccinated. But all that said, this vaccine is not, like turning you into a mutant or anything. So what do we do? How do we get these people to figure this out? Well, I have one solution. Gentlemen, get your masks. Even in younger men. COVID-19, this from a news story, I'm sorry I don't have the source for this, but COVID-19 could multiply your risk of suffering from erectile dysfunction. And if you already suffer from it, you could also be at greater risk of being infected by COVID-19. Now, that's an interesting reverse causation thing. And we're not talking about older men who are already known to be particularly vulnerable to COVID-19. The average age of the subjects studied by Italian researchers was 33. The author of the study, Dr. Emanuele A. Giannini, issued a strong warning: mask up to keep it up. Now, some people have made jokes about, well, if the Republican anti-vaxxers and the anti-maskers and, all the people who are believing this propaganda that Trump and some foreign governments are pushing in the United States, that these vaccines are going to turn you into a mutant or something like that, let them die, right? They're just going to get sick and die. Well, first of all, it's not going to be that simple. The death rate is only around 2-3%. And, and they've got some not cures, but they've got some pretty good drugs that, the monoclonal antibodies that work, that help people through it. So it's not, even if you wanted to adopt that kind of brutal mentality and say, well, yeah, you screw them. Why try to talk them into wearing a mask? Just let them get sick and die, because most of them aren't going to die. They're just going to get sick, and then their lost productivity becomes part of our tax bill. Their medical expenses becomes part of our insurance bill. You see how all that works. But increasing by 600% the chance that they can't get an erection, that the men among them can't get an erection once they've had COVID, 600% increase in erectile dysfunction. Well, that might stop them from breeding. I mean, it's not going to kill them, but hey, there won't be a future generation of anti-vaxxers. Don't tell anybody, right? Don't tell the anti-vaxxers, because this might work out very well. Or it might not. I mean, maybe this will be the thing that'll get them to say, shouldn't be doing that. I don't know. What's it going to be? Which message is going to be most effective? How can we convince these folks that all this hysteria that they're getting, all of the bizarre messages that they're getting, are lies? But I'm getting these things in email from people, from people that I once thought were smart people. It's just totally weird. Do you want your jeans modified? Well, yeah, these jeans, I've been wearing them for a couple days now. They probably should be washed, I suppose. Oh, no, not those jeans. I'm talking about your genetics jeans. Right. That ain't happening. Anyhow, we'll be back coming up on 27 minutes past the hour. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
thoughts on the big lie, version 1 and version 2? What do we do about it? How do we stop it? And what do we do with these bizarre conspiracy theorists? Today we're reading from Behold America by Sarah Churchwell, The Entangled History of America First and the American Dream. This is from the prologue. On Monday, 30 May 1927, a cool day with showers forecast, New Yorkers were gathering for the annual Memorial Day parades around the city. It was only 9 years since the end of the European War, into which America had been so reluctantly drawn and Europe had suddenly become closer than ever before. Precisely 10 days earlier, Charles Lindbergh had completed the first solo flight across the Atlantic in the spirit of St. Louis, and no one had yet stopped celebrating. Front pages around the country reported that Lucky Lindy had been mobbed in London, greeted by rapturous crowds of 150,000. Few Americans were talking about much else than the newest national hero, but in New York that day, different kinds of mobs were about to gather. Around 8 a.m., a group of Italian immigrants living in the Bronx set out for the elevated train on their way to Manhattan to join the parade. But they were not going to honor the American soldiers who had died in the service of their country. They were supporters of Mussolini, planning to join 400 American fascists who were marching in Manhattan's Memorial Day parade as part of the official fascist movement in the United States. They had been invited by the parade's organizers, to the outrage of many anti-fascists, including Italian nationalists and anarchists who threatened violence if the invitation wasn't rescinded. It wasn't. Like all his fellow fascists intending to march that day, Joseph Carisi was wearing the black shirt uniform, sporting leather boots, jodhpurs, a black cap, and carrying a steel-tipped riding crop. When he stopped to buy a newspaper, Carisi was jumped by two men, stabbed in the neck, and left to die on the sidewalk. Another fascist, Nicholas Amoroso, who was running either to catch up with his group or away from the killers, reports vary, was shot 4 times, once right through the heart. One of the 2 murdered men had served in the American Army during the Great War, the other with the Italian Army, papers reported. The parade they had meant to join took place without them, a fascist delegation of several hundred that was guarded by police to, quote, avert disorder. After the parade, the American blackshirts returned to their headquarters in the heart of Times Square. There, another of the fascists standing outside was set upon by 3 men. He defended himself with his riding crop as his fellow blackshirts charged out, brandishing clubs and whips, chasing the assailant through the theater traffic in Times Square, who fled as the black-shirted mob tore through the traffic. 100 fascists, reported the New York Times, rushed the attackers. A melee ensued that was quickly dispersed by the police. There was also violence in Brooklyn, where a parade of fascisti marched from the Angelo Rizza Fascista League at 274 Troutman Street in Bushwick. The LA Times reported several hundred men were parading, including 40 or 50 in the black shirt uniform. Fights broke out between supporters and protesters mingling on the sidewalks, and an anti-fascist was found lying on the ground, stabbed in the back. He survived and identified a fascist as his assailant. Accompanied by 30 police reserves to forestall violence, the marchers made their way through Brooklyn, stopping at the Wilson Avenue station, where the fascisti came to attention and gave the fascist salute. They ended at a Roman Catholic church, where the priest blessed them under large American and Italian flags, while the police remained on guard. The biggest outbreak of violence that Memorial Day, however, occurred in Queens, where it centered around a different right-wing group, not Italian Americans, but the self-proclaimed 100% American kind. By 1927, the Ku Klux Klan had spread across the United States since its rebirth in Georgia 12 years earlier. The first Klan was formed in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, as former Confederate soldiers in Tennessee created a secret society to promote white supremacism, and terrorize the newly freed slaves in the South during the Reconstruction era. The name is generally believed to have originated from the Greek word for circle, kuklos, while Klan pays homage to the mystified Celtic heritage supposedly shared by white Southerners. Within a decade or two, the first Klan had been successfully suppressed by law enforcement and died out by the turn of the century.
But in 1915, it was resuscitated in Georgia, and by the early 1920s, the Second Klan had achieved a powerful political presence in the United States, not only in the South, but across the country. I would add this is because of 1915, the movie Birth of a Nation came out. The Klan had an active presence in New York City and Long Island by 1927, with favorite slogans, which they even attempted to copyright at various points. That year, the Klan was quote, calling attention to the fact that it first announced the program of 100% Americanism and of America First. They were not, in fact, the first to adopt these mottos, as this book will show. In 1927, both phrases had been around for a decade or more. But as far as the Klan busily copywriting hate was concerned, America First belonged to them. And on Memorial Day in Queens, 1,000 or so of them had gathered to march, many in white robes and hoods. They were accompanied by 400 women from the so-called Clavana, the feminine branch of the Klan. Some of the reported 20,000 spectators in Queens that day objected to the Klan's presence, as others defended their right to march. Scuffles broke out, and it turned into a riot. Women fought women, and spectators fought the policemen and the Klansmen as their desire dictated, said a newspaper. Klan banners were shredded, and 5 of their number were arrested, said initial reports, while a few others were caught up in the confusion as well. The book, Behold America, Sarah Churchwell.
Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. What are we going to do about all this stuff? We've got, these new Big Lie 2.0. Oh, that you don't believe your lying eyes. That video that you can see from the Capitol, those are Antifa people, don't you know? Trump came out and said, hey, they were hugging and kissing the Capitol Police. That's why 140 of them ended up in the hospital. It's like, really? Oh, man. Anyhow, picking up your phone calls here. Tony in Puyallup, Washington. Hey, Tony, what's up?
Oh, Tom, I just wondered if you had discussed, I wasn't able to listen to you yesterday. Have you discussed this phenomenon of they are printing up fake certificates that you've gotten your vaccination and selling them online?
Yeah, I saw some are for sale over on eBay, I guess, is the article that I saw.
Yeah, well, yeah, I just think that's just, I was just blown away by it. Okay, I just wondered if you had
I think it's going to be a short-lived phenomena. It'll probably work in some circumstances and situations for people who want to do this. But you've got some big companies, IBM, Clear. Clear is the company that you can, go through the airport super fast with. IBM is working on one. Microsoft is working on one. You've got individual state governments. We're going to end up with digital vaccine passports. They will be voluntary. There's so much hysteria around all this kind of stuff. But we're going to end up with something like that because, frankly, business is going to need this. I have no interest in going into a restaurant if the person sitting next to me has not been vaccinated and is some kind of weird anti-vaxxer, right? I would like to know if I'm going to go into a restaurant that the people in there have all had their vaccine. If I'm going to take a cruise, I want to know that everybody on that ship has been vaccinated. If I'm going to be on an airplane, I'd rather not have some, wackadoodle sitting next to me who's into some bizarre conspiracy theory that the vaccine is going to change their DNA or something. Yeah.
Right,
so
but you don't think this is going to have too much of an effect? These fake ones that they're printing up online that they can order?
No, because like I said, I think it's going to have an effect around the edges, but the ones that they're creating, the digital ones, are QR code scannable. Just like you can get a boarding pass now on your phone or on your watch, and they're pretty hard to counterfeit. So I'm not real worried about it. I get it that it's happening. But I'm not real worried about it. Tony, thank you for the call. It's an interesting question, and it's going to be interesting to see how it all shakes out. Different countries are actually doing this in different ways too. Nancy in Elkhart, Indiana. Hey, Nancy, what's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Tom. I wanted to know if you had heard on Rachel Maddow's show the other night. My mouth was just open. I was so shocked when she was talking about when the I guess we'd call the Oath Keepers, I guess that's their name. And she was saying that they now had all this information while they were looking about trying to get these people arrested. And they actually had I guess you would call it the audibility, the true audible sounds of their microphones. And they even had the names of these people. And when they were inside, stuff that hadn't been released before. And I wanted to know if, this is, when they get upset, when the Republicans get upset about like Maxine Waters, well, the news, I don't understand. They could have picked this up. They picked up the Maxine Waters story. And this could have been, I thought the next day, the news would have something on this because they had, I guess there was a man named Rhodes. And I thought, could you explain
Stuart
this
Rhodes,
to people that hadn't heard it?
He's one of the founders. Yeah. Rachel does a really good job of covering that stuff and has in the past and is continuing to, and I think it's important reporting. But if a black woman says something, Fox News will go nuts. And the Republican Party will go nuts. And so, that's why Maxine Waters is more in the news than the Oath Keepers, frankly. But the question that I have, Nancy... The question that I have and the thing that I'm not seeing answered and that concerns me tremendously is, what about the leadership? Where did this thing come from? There was that January 5th secret meeting in the Trump Hotel that apparently Senator Tuberville or whatever his name is attended, and Don Jr. and a bunch of them that was planning for the next day. It looks to me like none of this was accidental. I think Roger Stone is probably right in the middle of it. At least he seems to be trying to imply that he is. He was certainly right in the middle of the 2000 Brook Brothers riot, which is really basically just the same thing. A bunch of people trying to shut down a government function by threat of physical intimidation. They actually succeeded in shutting down the count in Florida back in 2000. And I think they thought they were going to shut down the count in Washington, D.C. in 2020. And they nearly did, by the way.
She had some proof of some radio broadcasts that were showing people from out of town how to come, what time, and how to get there ahead of time, what days.
Yeah, this is bigger than I think the average American has any idea. And
I think so, and you're the only one I heard it from.
What we're going to find out, I believe, this is my opinion. I can't back this up with specific facts, but I think that there's a fair amount of evidence, at least circumstantial evidence at this point, that suggests that this is true, that this was an attempt at the highest levels of government. And by highest levels of government, I'm talking about the President of the United States and the people around him. This was an attempt at the highest levels of government to overturn the 2020 election and declare Donald Trump basically president for life, dictator for life, strongman dictator, fascist dictator, whatever, end the American experiment in small d democracy and a small r republic, and replace it with, America becoming just another oligarchy like Turkey or Hungary or Russia or like that, and that was the goal. And that there were a whole bunch of people in on that goal, and I want to know what Bill Barr's role was in that role. I want to know what Chris Miller's role was in that effort. I want to know what Trump Jr. and the rest of the Trump family's role was in that. I want to know what Tommy Tuberville was doing in that thing. I want to know. I've read now 2 articles. Neither one has sources that I consider credible, unfortunately. But I've seen 2 articles now that they're having a hard time finding any of the footage pre-January 6th from the security cameras in the Capitals. Apparently, this is according to at least one story, it was either wiped or accidentally wiped, or it only stays for 30 days, and so it's now long gone. So if Lauren Boebert or Marjorie Trader Green or one of the others, were actually giving tours to these traitors who were going to come and attack the United States government and try and try to assassinate Nancy Pelosi and Mike Pence. Yeah. If they were actually participating in that, the hard evidence may be gone forever. I mean, it's possible that we're just not seeing it because, Merrick Garland and the Justice Department has seized it and they've got it before a grand jury and it's secret testimony. I hope that's the case, but I am not holding my breath. I've seen enough of these kind of cover-ups. Go ahead.
Well, I thank you, and please keep us all informed as you do. Thank you so much.
I will do my very best. Thank you, Nancy. I appreciate the call. Mm-hmm. Thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV there in Elkhart, Indiana. Dave in Federal Way, Washington, listening on Sirius XM. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I just want to say about January 6th and the Miller memo. You are 100% right. All right, and I'm going to try to convince you. I mean, I understand why you have your doubts, but I'm going to try to convince you, okay? Mark Milley, the fate of this democracy was in the hands of Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I don't particularly like Milley, but he knew one thing, and that me and him agree on one thing. Mike Flynn is a flake, all right? Milley was not going to risk this union.
He's not just a flake. He's a foreign agent. He took $600,000 from Turkey and tried to change U.S. policy while he was in office, while he was the national security advisor.
Yes, but I just know Milley knows the truth. Flynn is a flake. Yeah. All right? Yeah. Right? And so he wasn't going to risk it. Now, Milley disagreed with President Biden over withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan, okay? Now, let me explain this. Nobody wants troops out of Afghanistan more than me. The 18 worst months of my life were spent in Kandahar, Afghanistan, all right? Nobody wants us out more than me. But there's something bigger here. We got a problem. Joe Biden truly respects, he does not agree, but he respects the 70 million Trump voters, okay? And our problem is simply this. We have a Franz von Papen said he could control Hitler, all right? If you ever look at their resumes, compare Papen's to Hitler's. Of course, any reasonable German would agree with von Papen. I mean, his resume was quite impressive. Hitler's was nothing by comparison, okay? But here's what Hitler knew. Hitler knew that nobody was interested in going back to sanity and normalcy. That's what Hitler knew. And this is what Trump and the Trump voters know. And I think Joe Biden's making a mistake by trying to reach out to him.
I'm not yet sure how much he's trying to reach out to them versus he's just trying to establish a record so that when he does things unilaterally, essentially, he can say, I tried everything I could. They wouldn't go along with me. I'm more inclined to think that's the game he's playing, but we'll see.
To Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I mean, I've heard him at least twice now in public venues redefine bipartisanship as the Republican people are with me, even if the elected officials aren't. And welcome back. Mark in Costa Mesa, California. Hey, Mark, thanks for listening to the Thom Hartmann app. What's up?
Hi, Tom. Nice to talk to you always. I thought about this right after the 1-6, and but I didn't get on the phone with you about it. But I always think about when Trump does something, he always has two things: what's in it for him, and then in this case with 1-6, I think that he didn't come up with this. It's the worst crime in the history of the United States, along with his incompetence as president and the lack of concern for the coronavirus. So those are he should be charged for both. He doesn't look concerned at all. And it's like what's in it for him? It's like he got money for it. but he also he's protected. So he's guaranteed protection. And so he goes on and on. Everything he does is what's in it for him. His presidential donations, and then also you were talking about his grifting and taking his donation money and the family taking the money. It's like he's an expert on laundering money and hiding money overseas. So he's doing it all. And if it's like his presidential campaign 2024. He knows he's not going to be president, but he just cares about that hearing that money go from people's accounts into his account, and that's what he's about. Everything he does, that's what he's about.
Oh, and he told us this. Back during the primary, he said, "I'll be the first person ever to make money running for president." He bragged about it, and then apparently him and his family embezzled hundreds of millions, or at least millions of dollars, out of the inaugural committee, and then $600 million is missing from his reelection committee, and nobody's quite sure where it went or who it went to. You've got now his son and his son's girlfriend, I guess, is what you would call Kimberly Guilfoyle. They just bought a couple of $10 million mansions down in Florida. The Trump family seems to be centering as many of their assets as they can in real estate in Florida. Ivanka just bought a big chunk of land, multi-million-dollar piece of land on an island down there. I think the reason why is because the Florida bankruptcy laws. In most states, if you declare bankruptcy, you lose your home as well. They can take your home, as one of your assets. In Florida, they can't take your principal residence. So Trump has declared Mar-a-Lago, which is one of his most valuable properties, as his principal residence. His kids are all establishing multi-million-dollar principal residences down there. So if they go down, if they get convicted of these crimes, if they're looking at massive bankruptcy and loss of assets and things, they'll still have 10, 20, 30 million dollar cushions. And 10, 20, 30 million dollars, if you live modestly, you can have a pretty good life for the rest of your life, even if you're in your 30s or 40s. So, I think they're getting ready. I think they're getting ready for the grift to end. But I agree with you, Mark. This entire thing has been a long con. It's been one giant grift. This is what grifters do. Donald Trump is a grifter, a professional grifter. And, it's amazing he's been able to pull it off as long as he has. I think a lot of Americans are starting to see through it now. But the damage he did, it's incredible. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Astonishing news out of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention that has to do with the lifespan of Americans. Since World War II, the average lifespan of American men and women have continuously increased, all the way up to 78.8 years in 2019. Continuous increase. Things were getting better, more and more people were getting health care, we were making medical technology advances, there was a rather dramatic decline in smoking between the 1990s and the 2010s. All kinds of things were working together. And then came Donald Trump's response to COVID-19, causing America, with 4% of the world's population, to have 20% of the world's deaths. The result of that has been extraordinary. For the first time since World War II, American life expectancy has declined. It's all over in a new video for supporters of our program over at ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you at 8.5 minutes before the hour. And Eileen in Jersey City, New Jersey. Hey, Eileen, what's up?
Hi, Tom. You were asking what we should do about people that say that the January insurrection was really caused by Antifa and Black Lives Matter. And I was thinking maybe we should just bow to the absurd and say that whenever they show pictures or video of the protests in Portland, Oregon, we should just say, well, those are fake Black Lives Matter and and fake Antifa. I mean, at this point, this maybe we should just
some of them are
to say that.
I mean, some of them are. You've got, it seems like, there was an interesting op-ed that was published in the Oregonian about 2 weeks ago by a black group here in Portland, a group of black organizers who were saying to the anarchists, to the people who just want to tear the government down, period, and start over again, and thus are out, busting windows and things like that. You are not helping the cause, right? That was the message. So there are fake anti-fascists out there, and there are fake Black Lives Matter folks out there. Sadly, tragically, and this is not unique to Portland, by the way. And in fact, some of them were the groups that basically took down the old Occupy movement. The Occupy movement was infiltrated and then taken down in large part by these cult members, out of New York, from the so-called Revolutionary Communist Party. Most of this is like nuance that's way beyond anybody else's mind, but I get what you're saying, Eileen. As long as they're gonna, I'm reluctant to fight a lie with a lie, but I totally get what you're saying. I mean, it's just it is so absurd. Eileen, thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you. Sandy in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Hey, Sandy, what's on your mind?
Hey, I just was calling about the vaccination question that you had to us. Mm-hmm. Because, I live in the Bible Belt. I was really proud of Doug Jones. I was probably the only person in my church other than my husband that voted for him. And, but, the Bible teaches us, we are in the Bible Belt, and the Bible teaches us that we are to, number one, love the Lord, and number two, to love our neighbors. And so in the same way I was making the argument about the face mask to people that weren't wearing them, that I'm not doing this for me, I'm doing this so my germs don't get on you. Well, then my husband got COVID. He spent 46 days in an ICU, and my church family supported me amazingly when I come home and he was on home health. They were amazing. And so I'm having that difficulty trying to reconcile how I can't convince them to get the vaccine, and yet, they saw him. They saw me when I couldn't visit him. They supported me. I love them. It doesn't matter what their choice is. I'm still going to love them. But I want it because I want it because I love them, So when you asked that question, I thought, it's not until our governor mandated the mask that they wore the mask. And as much as I love my freedom, I just think, like you said earlier about, you want to know when you go to a restaurant, is this restaurant only taking people who have been vaccinated? That's what it's going to come down to, is public shunning. You can't go to these Alabama football games, can't go to concerts, you can't go to May's coming up. We used to have a thing in Foley every year at Orange Beach, these concerts. So, unfortunately, when that was your question, how are we going to do it? I think that until they're made to do it, there's no, you can't, I can't love them enough to convince them.
Yeah, I totally get it, Sandy. And community is important, and friends are important, even when they're wrong, even when they've been brainwashed. We still love them, and they're still part of our essentially families, our extended families. I think, though, that, we've talked in the past about, on the program about boycotts and how I generally am not a big fan of boycotts because typically they don't work. Here, I'm recommending the opposite. What I think all of us need to be doing is calling places that we would normally patronize. Call the restaurants that you would go to. Call the team that you would like to go root for, and simply say, would you please let me know if you're going to require vaccines to get in, because I'm not coming unless you do. Or here's my phone number. Would you please send me a text message when you have made it your official policy that only vaccinated people can come in? Because then I will start patronizing you. And we need to start building this kind of positive pressure towards safe places, because that's what we need, are safe places. Sandy, thank you so much for putting such a beautiful human face on this whole discussion that can so easily get contentious. It's just wonderful. Sandy, thank you. Thank you very much. It's great to hear from you. We will be back. There is more in the news, and there's some pretty amazing, well, we've got a debate coming up. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code Tom. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
Today is Kickback, Exposing the Global Corporate Bribery Network by David Montero. This is from the introduction, Chapter 1. During Watergate, the appointment of a special prosecutor to investigate Richard Nixon's alleged tampering with elections was intended to mark the close of a sordid chapter in American history. Instead, that effort, culminating in Nixon's resignation, would prove to be only the beginning of a deeper political morass that America would face for decades to come. Congressional investigations would uncover for the first time that multinational corporations, through slush funds and bribes, were not only secretly funding political organizations at home, like Nixon's re-election campaign, but corrupting foreign officials abroad. This new perspective on the corporate abuse of power and its impact overseas would result in the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FPCA, groundbreaking legislation that, by prohibiting commercial bribery for the first time in history, sought to change how capitalism and political affairs were conducted all around the world. Now, more than 40 years later, we are experiencing a kind of deja vu as the special counsel investigates whether the president allegedly abused his power, again by obstructing an inquiry into a possible manipulation of our country's elections. Just as was the case in Watergate, whatever special counsel Robert Mueller uncovers will likely mark the beginning, rather than the end, of a reassessment of how power actually operates in this country. And just as in Watergate, there's the possibility that Mueller's far-reaching probe may reveal how tightly political corruption and corporate corruption are linked through bribery, just under the surface of America's political life. Nixon was the recipient of secret corporate donations, which were considered illegal because they should have been disclosed. But the payments, while unlawful, did not compromise the presidential election itself. Mueller's Russian inquiry is directed at a potentially far more serious crime, Whether Donald Trump, the head of a sprawling business empire, colluded with a foreign power to deliberately sway the American electorate, committing the very crime that the FCPA had been trying to eradicate since Watergate, the offer of a foreign bribe, a kickback. That law specifically states that a corporate bribe need not involve an actual exchange of money. An offer of anything of value, such as a promise to a foreign government official, is sufficient to violate its terms. This is precisely what Mueller is trying to ascertain, whether Trump, his company, his associates, or his family, or some combination of them, offered a promise to Russian government officials, a quid pro quo, that if they helped Trump by manipulating the elections, Trump, if victorious, would ease U.S. sanctions against Russia. Doing so would allow greater U.S. investment of Russia and would benefit Russian officials and oligarchs, the Trump business organization, the corporate interests of the Trump family, and former members of his senior staff, including Paul Manafort, his one-time campaign chairman, and Michael Flynn, his disgraced national security advisor. If the Trump organization or anyone connected with it did make such a promise, and depending on how that promise was conveyed to Russian officials, the Justice Department would have strong grounds for pursuing an FCPA charge, among others. An FCPA violation is within Mueller's mandate to investigate, quote, any matters that arose or may arise directly from this investigation. As has been widely observed, Mueller has hired 2 former federal law enforcement officials with extensive experience in investigating fraud, money laundering, and overseas bribery. Andrew Weissman, who ran the Justice Department's fraud section, which enforces the FCPA, and Greg Andres, who helped oversee FCPA policy in the criminal division. The drama playing out in Washington starkly highlights the fact that foreign corporate bribery can be a deeply misleading term. We have come to regard it, when we think of it at all, as something that unscrupulous companies do in distant countries, so that any impact it has must be contained overseas. If a corporation pays kickbacks to a greedy government official abroad, why should we be concerned? But in a highly interconnected world, bound together by a global market, a global financial system, and the constant migration of peoples, goods, capital, corruption rarely stays out there. Bribes eventually harm Americans, American society, American values, and American interests, both domestically and around the world, in ways that are difficult to gauge. Why do firms resort to bribery? The obvious reason is to gain an advantage over their competitors. But illicit payments also buy the illusion of growth in the short term, of increased market share and inflated firm value. It does not take into account the harm that this practice causes to companies themselves, sinking employee morale, diminished profit margins, and the possibility of hundreds of millions of dollars in fines and penalties, not to mention a reputation that will be associated with corruption and deceit. They also effectively steal the public's money because the majority of bribery cases involve capital-intensive development and infrastructure projects such as roads, dams, defense systems, oil extraction, or mining that are publicly funded. To recoup the bribes involved in winning such contracts, companies conspire with foreign officials to inflate the costs, sometimes by 10 or even hundreds of millions of dollars. While the companies and the officials win out, taxpayers are left shouldering the burden. Corporate bribes involve a remarkable amount of money. The World Bank has estimated $1 trillion a year, although this may represent the high end. Others have placed the market at 10% of the $4 trillion spent annually on global public procurement. The book Kickback by David Montero. The book The America Syndrome by Betsy Hartman.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. So, should we unpack the Supreme Court after Mitch McConnell's little dance with Merrick Garland, etc.? John Vecchione is with us. He is a senior attorney with the New Civil Liberties Alliance, a conservative group. NCLAlegal.org is the website. NCLA Legal is also the Twitter handle. John, welcome to the program. So why do you object to unpacking Mitch McConnell's court packing?
Well, obviously, I disagree with the way you phrased it. We've had, for 150 years, 9 members of the Supreme Court. And that was from the Judiciary Act of 1868, which was specifically put in to make sure that the slave states did not have the influence on the Supreme Court they'd had before. It was, in fact, this 9, the number picked to stop the slave states from controlling the appellate courts. And it's been a good number. And the way that the current bill that's by Markey and Nadler, what they want to do is put 4 senators in, 4 justices in. All
you mean 4 new justices? Yeah.
4 new justices picked at the same time. Now, if you didn't want some ideological outcome, but you did think that there should be more justices, what you do is have it staggered. And they haven't done that. So I think it's kind of a raw effort to not have checks and balances. And I think that it would undermine the even the liberal precedents that the Supreme Court has would all be undermined because it would be looked upon as a rubber stamp for whatever the current group of people running the Senate and the House think.
Yeah. Well, it seems to me that just a rational first step would be to say, Merrick Garland should have been on the court. Mitch McConnell decided he was going to pack the court. Ruth Bader Ginsburg died within a window that Mitch McConnell just a couple of years earlier had said, that really should go to the next president, as it had before. The packing the court and unpacking the court has been done repeatedly throughout our history for purely political purposes. You'll recall in 1800, after John Adams lost the election of 1800, he and the Federalists reduced the number of members on the Supreme Court so that Jefferson wouldn't get an appointee. Jefferson came in and expanded the court. We had the same thing after, when Andrew Johnson became president. The Congress, which was rather opposed to Johnson, actually reduced the number of members of the court so that Johnson couldn't appoint anybody. You're right. After Johnson was out of office and Ulysses Grant was president, they took it back up to 9. But repeatedly, the court has been basically a political football. Mitch McConnell has been playing political football. Not only that, he blew up the filibuster. You've got a guy who has been credibly accused of rape and sexual assault on multiple occasions. Fewer than 1% of his papers were ever even released. I mean, it seems to me like the legitimacy, you've got one member of the court, Clarence Thomas, whose wife helped organize a rally that led to an attempt at bringing down our democracy. I can't see how this court could have any less credibility. And it seems to me that adding 4 members to it might, number one, expand that credibility, and might, number two, deal with the problem that John Roberts himself identified a couple of years ago, which is that the courts are overwhelmed in terms of the number of cases they have versus the number of judges that they have.
The Supreme Court isn't overwhelmed. It's the lower courts that have a big docket. The Supreme Court's been taking fewer and fewer cases. I would say that the Mitch McConnell and the other things you mentioned are largely political hardball, but they have not changed the number on the court, except you are absolutely correct on the Andrew Johnson thing. That action, and I'll just say for your listeners, the Republican Congress of the Civil War did not want Johnson putting anyone on the court, so they kept reducing the number down to 7. And then after, from the act I mentioned in 1868, they fixed it at 9. Since that time, though, there's never been a change in the number of Supreme Court justices, and that's 150 years, and that's a lot of water under the bridge. I think, though, that the Supreme Court is looked upon by the populace. It's the most popular branch we have right now, even though Joe Biden's approval numbers
That's
are
not saying a lot today.
Trump. It's damning with faint praise, right? But yes. It is held in higher respect than either the Congress or the presidency. And part of that is, as I said earlier, if you really thought that there should be more judges and you thought that there had been skullduggery, you wouldn't have the number 4 to put in the number 13. Now, how many of your listeners look at horoscopes? But I know that they're very popular in the United States, more popular than I think they should be. And the number 13 is not a good number for folks who like that sort of thing. So I think
it's one of my lucky numbers. But John, let's stipulate that we both agree that the court should not be a political body. Can we agree on that?
The job of the justices is different from that of legislatures, and it shouldn't be done that way. Yeah, I agree with that.
Right. Okay. So what are the things, and I think that we can probably both agree that through most of its history, the court actually has, not always, but probably more often than it should, acted as if it were a political body. So there's a whole bunch of solutions that have been proposed. Expand the court, put in term limits, which would be constitutional as long as those people continue to be federal judges. There are other things that have been suggested over the years. What would you do to reduce the politicization, the political bias of the court? For example, you had Thomas's wife in 2000 when he voted to stop the vote, the constitutionally mandated recount down in Florida that was ordered by the Supreme Court down there, the Florida Supreme Court. When he ordered that stopped, his wife was vetting people for the George W. Bush White House. A clear conflict of interest. You've had Scalia's son arguing at least two cases that Scalia was involved in, clear conflicts of interest. And those are just the tip of the iceberg. What do we do? How do we change this? I mean, is it as simple as something like, well, hey, let's put cameras in the courthouse. Let's make the deliberations more open. Let's do term limits. I mean, where would you begin?
Well, I think, first, I don't think that the outcomes have been political the way you and I normally mean political. For instance, there are often Justice Kagan doesn't always rule the way the Democrats would want her to rule. And Justice Thomas and Scalia didn't always rule the way Republicans would want them to rule. Now, obviously, you can look at the hot-button cases and you go, hey, I think something's going on here. But I do think that that one thing that has happened is right now there's an effort to intimidate the court to not, in my view, do their jobs. I mean, if you look what happened with Roosevelt, he threatened to pack the Supreme Court and add members, and everyone rejected it. But the judges changed their views. They were intimidated, and then Roosevelt did what you have to do if you really want to change.
Two judges changed their rules. Owen Roberts was the main one.
After election, he won election after election, and he replaced all the justices. He appointed them all.
Sure.
And that's how you change them.
Yeah, no, I get that, but you're not going to have a four-term president again. Number one, we altered the Constitution on that regard, and well, we're out of time. John Vecchione, fascinating conversation. Senior attorney, new conservative civil liberties alliance, the New Civil Liberties Alliance. NCLAlegal.org is the website. NCLA Legal is the Twitter handle. John, good talking with you. Thanks for dropping by.
Thank you. It's been interesting, Tom.
Indeed. We'll be right back. It's 15 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, I still think we need to expand the court and we need to depoliticize it. Mitch McConnell has done incredible damage. And welcome back. Dennis in Aptos, California. Hey, Dennis, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Yeah, hi. Could we talk about the vaccines again? Or
sure.
Do you want to talk about... Okay. Yeah, I've been on LinkedIn the last couple of days, checking things out. And I am just amazed at how many anti-vaxxers who are college professors, people with, important, well-paid jobs here and there, are falling for the BS, the Orwellian anti-vax stuff that, and I have to admit, I don't watch it. I never watch Fox or any of that stuff. I just don't. But it's just amazing. People that, have gotten education and they're acting just like a bunch of brain dead, I don't know what. It's just incredible. I mean, and a lot of these people, I'm 67.
Dennis, it sounds like you're like incredulous and can't figure out why. Let me just put a question to you. If Joe Biden can't get this pandemic under control because 20, 30, 40% of the population refuses to get vaccinated, so we continue to have a health crisis, which will continue to maintain an economic crisis, what's that going to do to Democrats' prospects in the 2022 and 2024 elections? It's going to hurt them, right?
I hear you, and I think it is sabotage. But, the sabotage is being planned by those in Congress and the Republican Party. And, by the way, I'm now spelling Republican with 3 Ks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, but these are people that I guess they're Trumpanzees. They're going to believe whatever Trump tells them. And so they're not going to get vaccinated. And yeah, they will by default screw things up so that this COVID never goes away. And it's probably going to happen in other nations as well. And then, the vaccination cards that we have, I mean, they're practically going to be worthless.
Well, and Trump gets a twofer here.
It's going to keep mutating. I mean, I have my card.
Yeah, I do too. Trump gets a twofer. Number one, he gets to sabotage Joe Biden's efforts to fix things. And number two, if he can successfully do that, and so far he's had considerable success. I mean, when you've got half of Republicans saying, wait a minute, I'm not going to get vaccinated, that's mind-boggling, right? And number two, if he can do that, he's going to have another 500,000 people die on Joe Biden's watch, which means that he'll be able to say to history, I wasn't the guy who killed 500,000 people. Joe Biden did too. It wasn't just me. And, he gets to cast off the blame or shift the blame or get the blame ignored or rewrite history. So, I just expect a whole lot more of this. I think we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg on the anti-vax stuff because there's political hay to be made. And that's what these guys are all about, Dennis.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. There's some light here in that Ted Nugent, we know what kind of a right-wing whack job he is. He got COVID, and now he's saying it's the worst sickness he's ever gotten.
Yeah, but if he survives, he'll probably be singing the same song Trump is, which is, hey, I survived. It's no big deal. Yeah, you can do that.
When he was almost on a ventilator.
Right, exactly. Dennis, thank you for the call. I mean, maybe he'll do like, the British Prime Minister, but I doubt it. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Well, the Confederacy continues to live. Governor Tate Reeves, the governor of Mississippi, just signed a proclamation making April the Confederate Heritage Month in Mississippi. That's kind of the bad news. The good news is that it didn't get published on the state's websites. It got published over on Facebook, where there's a good contingent of racists and neo-Confederates to begin with. But what does this say about America, that a part of the country that literally was a police state, a fascist police state, there was no democracy left by 1861 in the South. It was completely controlled by a few thousand families who owned these massive plantations. And in my little riff that's over at ThomHartmann.com for the supporters of our program, I go through some of the details of it. Just the sad, sad history of the South. It is really worth checking out. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. Thom Hartmann here with you, 21 minutes past the hour. So the anti-vax, this is fascinating about this anti-vaxxer. They're only vaccinated people will marry each other, while non-vaccinated people will also get married. It will split the human race into a fake race, the vaccinated race. This is, actual stuff that's being said on the internet that's not just, in the weirdest, fringiest parts, but it's like all over the place. This anti-vax hysteria. And from Trump's point of view, it's a twofer. All right, if he can get more Americans, you've got about half of Republicans now saying, I don't think I'll get vaccinated. And I know it's easy to sit back and go, oh yeah, well, they're going to kill themselves off. Darwin Awards, but the fact of the matter is most of them aren't going to die. I realize 1/3 of people 90 days out who have been diagnosed with COVID end up with mental health issues. With the Trump followers, it's probably difficult to tell the difference. I realize that about 10% of people who have COVID, serious COVID, suffer long-term consequences and possibly even disability. They're going to cost us more on things like Social Security, disability insurance. Our insurance premiums are going to go up. I realize all those things, all those kind of downsides of the Trumpers. But from Trump's point of view, those are all upsides. If he can help bankrupt Medicare and Medicaid by having more people get sick, that's good, right? Medicare and Medicaid are socialism in the worldview of the billionaires, the right-wing billionaires who run the Republican Party. They should be destroyed. And Social Security. George W. Bush tried to privatize Social Security in 2005 after he won re-election. Remember, he came out and he said, I just won an election. I've got political capital. I'm going to use that political capital to privatize Social Security. Didn't work out. Couldn't even get his own party to go along with it. But hey, if we can throw Social Security disability into a crisis, plus as more and more people get sick and more people die, we can say, well, yeah, they're just stupid Republicans, but they're not just stupid Republicans. You're going to have a couple of stupid Republicans who are going to infect a bunch of really decent people. And grandma's going to die, and little kids are going to get disabled, and people are going to have COPD for the rest of their lives, and people who are perfectly innocent in this thing. But Trump gets to say, number one, see, Joe Biden killed just as many people as I did. If he can keep this up, number one. And number two, he gets to feed these conspiracy theories. And he's all about conspiracy theories. Oh, I actually won the election. I'm the smartest man ever. I don't have a racist bone in my body. I mean, 40,000 lies during the 4 years of his presidency? It's something like the 37,000 lies. I forget the exact number that was documented by the Washington Post. But hey, what's one more lie? And he sees this as a political benefit. And we are still in the situation which Donald Trump and Jared Kushner identified in the weeks after April 7th, which some really good reporting was done in Vanity Fair about, where they basically sat around, now I'm paraphrasing here, but they basically sat around and said, most of the people who are dying from this are black. And most of the places where it's really going on bad, that are really getting hit hard, are big cities that are run by black mayors and that have large black populations. So let's just let them die. I mean, this was their ideology, basically. This was their animating principle. I've written several op-eds about this over the years, or over this last year. I think it's a crime. I think it's a crime on the order of genocide. I think it needs to be called out. I think he needs to be prosecuted for it. But it is still the fact that if you are black or brown or Native American, you are more likely to die from COVID. So if Trump continues promoting these theories, yeah, there's going to be some Republicans who are going to get sick and die. But they are also going to be spreaders. They're going to be the people walking into the store with the mask down below their nose. I saw one of these guys yesterday. He was walking with his girlfriend or wife, and he had his mask below his nose. And I was so tempted to say to her, does he wear his underwear that way too? It was like, no, you just don't do that anymore, right? Or are you still picking fights with mask holes? I stopped. I stopped picking fights with them, about a month ago, but But it sure looks to me like the longer Trump can perpetuate these lies, the more he can encourage these conspiracy theories. It's going to turn you into a mutant. You know, your kids are going to become 12 feet tall or what, 2 feet tall. The more he can do that, the more political benefit he gains. That's how sick and twisted our politics have become. And to add to it, and the real tragedy here, is that virtually the entire Republican Party is right there with him.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So what do we do about that? How can we pull this country back together?
Our book for today is Kickback, Exposing the Global Corporate Bribery Network by David Montero. This is from the introduction, Chapter 1. During Watergate, the appointment of a special prosecutor to investigate Richard Nixon's alleged tampering with elections was intended to mark the close of a sordid chapter in American history. Instead, that effort, culminating in Nixon's resignation, would prove to be only the beginning of a deeper political morass that America would face for decades to come. Congressional investigations would uncover for the first time that multinational corporations, through slush funds and bribes, were not only secretly funding political organizations at home, like Nixon's re-election campaign, but corrupting foreign officials abroad. This new perspective on the corporate abuse of power and its impact overseas would result in the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FPCA, groundbreaking legislation that, by prohibiting commercial bribery for the first time in history, sought to change how capitalism and political affairs were conducted all around the world. Now, more than 40 years later, we are experiencing a kind of deja vu as the special counsel investigates whether the president allegedly abused his power, again by obstructing an inquiry into a possible manipulation of our country's elections. Just as was the case in Watergate, whatever special counsel Robert Mueller uncovers will likely mark the beginning, rather than the end, of a reassessment of how power actually operates in this country. And just as in Watergate, there's the possibility that Mueller's far-reaching probe may reveal how tightly political corruption and corporate corruption are linked through bribery, just under the surface of America's political life. Nixon was the recipient of secret corporate donations, which were considered illegal because they should have been disclosed. But the payments, while unlawful, did not compromise the presidential election itself. Mueller's Russian inquiry is directed at a potentially far more serious crime, whether Donald Trump, the head of a sprawling business empire, colluded with a foreign power to deliberately sway the American electorate, committing the very crime that the FCPA had been trying to eradicate since Watergate, the offer of a foreign bribe, a kickback. That law specifically states that a corporate bribe need not involve an actual exchange of money. An offer of anything of value, such as a promise to a foreign government official, is sufficient to violate its terms. This is precisely what Mueller is trying to ascertain, whether Trump, his company, his associates, or his family, or some combination of them, offered a promise to Russian government officials, a quid pro quo, that if they helped Trump by manipulating the elections, Trump, if victorious, would ease U.S. sanctions against Russia. Doing so would allow greater U.S. investment of Russia and would benefit Russian officials and oligarchs, the Trump Business Organization, the corporate interests of the Trump family, and former members of his senior staff, including Paul Manafort, his one-time campaign chairman, and Michael Flynn, his disgraced national security advisor. If the Trump Organization or anyone connected with it did make such a promise, and depending on how that promise was conveyed to Russian officials, the Justice Department would have strong grounds for pursuing an FCPA charge, among others. An FCPA violation is within Mueller's mandate to investigate, quote, any matters that arose or may arise directly from this investigation. As has been widely observed, Mueller has hired 2 former federal law enforcement officials with extensive experience in investigating fraud, money laundering, and overseas bribery. Andrew Weissman, who ran the Justice Department's fraud section, which enforces the FCPA, and Greg Andres, who helped oversee FCPA policy in the criminal division. The drama playing out in Washington starkly highlights the fact that foreign corporate bribery can be a deeply misleading term. We've come to regard it, when we think of it at all, as something that unscrupulous companies do in distant countries, so that any impact it has must be contained overseas. If a corporation pays kickbacks to a greedy government official abroad, why should we be concerned? But in a highly interconnected world, bound together by a global market, a global financial system, and the constant migration of peoples, goods, capital, corruption rarely stays out there. Bribes eventually harm Americans, American society, American values, and American interests, both domestically and around the world, in ways that are difficult to gauge. Why do firms resort to bribery? The obvious reason is to gain an advantage over their competitors. But illicit payments also buy the illusion of growth in the short term, of increased market share and inflated firm value. It does not take into account the harm that this practice causes to companies themselves: sinking employee morale, diminished profit margins, and the possibility of hundreds of millions of dollars in fines and penalties, not to mention a reputation that will be associated with corruption and deceit. They also effectively steal the public's money, because the majority of bribery cases involve capital-intensive development and infrastructure projects such as roads, dams, defense systems, oil extraction, or mining that are publicly funded. To recoup the bribes involved in winning such contracts, companies conspire with foreign officials to inflate the costs, sometimes by 10 or even hundreds of millions of dollars. While the companies and the officials win out, taxpayers are left shouldering the burden. Corporate bribes involve a remarkable amount of money. The World Bank has estimated $1 trillion a year, although this may represent the high end. Others have placed the market at 10% of the $4 trillion spent annually on global public procurement. The book Kickback by David Montero. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program.
34 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So this is a quote from a community chat last month. Travis Getty's pulled these together for an article over at Raw Story. Speaking of people who have been vaccinated, right? This is from a public message board. They are now genetically modified humans. They are not even technically human anymore. Vaccinated people are honestly a threat to humanity as a whole. Another person says, only vaccinated people will marry each other, while non-vaccinated will also get married. It will split the human race into two. We will have the vaccinated race and the unvaccinated race. Really? But it does raise an interesting question. I mean, you know, the old question, would you allow your as if you had any say in it in this day and age, but, you know, step into the Wayback Machine 100 years. Would you allow your child to marry a Republican? You know, would you encourage your child to marry a Republican, shall we say now? Is this going to be the new social cleavage point? The vaccinated versus the unvaccinated? Should we make them really crazy by coming up with a little V sign that you can tattoo on your forehead because they're all freaked out about the mark of the beast, right? I don't know. There's a lot of possibilities here. Let's pick up some of your phone calls. Will in Manhattan. Hey, Will, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, Tom, in regards to the Democrats trying to start an investigation regarding the 1/6 insurrection, and they're having so much pushback from the Republicans.
The Republicans seem to be blowing up every effort.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, the Republicans are blowing up almost every effort with procedural stuff, but continue.
So my question is, how is it that they were able to start 60+ investigations of Clinton's emails, fake emails, with no problem?
Well, they did have some problems, but they had 8 years. so arguably even more than that. But, they did have some problems doing that. But and they didn't find anything, frankly, which is kind of sad. But they had a huge news organization behind them, Fox News, and they had a concentrated effort. But I think you're right, Will. I suspect this stuff is ultimately going to come out. I'm just frustrated, maybe is not quite the right word, but something like that it's not happening fast enough and that it's not happening visibly enough. I'm real concerned about stuff like this falling down the memory hole. Will, thanks for the call. Luke in St. Albans, Vermont. Hey, Luke, what's up?
I have to agree with what your last statement was. I am also very frustrated that there hasn't been more prosecutions. That's sort of why I called. I feel that look at Iceland. After the economic crisis in 2007, they prosecuted people. And
yeah, they sent six bankers to jail.
I bet it's all for the better. And we seem to lack the will, and I understand why in some regards you don't want to set the precedent of prosecuting political enemies. But there comes a point where you're at the bottom floor, right? You're like how much more damage can be done? Like, for instance, you can't let Trump get away with insurrection. You just can't. And you can't let secessionists who are in Congress get away with things, or else where do you go? How much lower can you go? I mean, what precedent, how much worse can it get? So, I mean, if you want to solve politicizing the Supreme Court, you got to prosecute people. You got to expel people, impeach them. Thomas should be impeached. Clear conflict of interest, impeachable offenses, and any other judge. Any other judge in Thomas's spot probably would have lost their job. So he should lose his job. I mean,
well, or would have been prosecuted under the Federal Code of Judicial Ethics. It's just that the Supreme Court has ruled that code does not apply to them. So you've got Scalia and Thomas and a few others, who are, and now you've got Amy Coney Barrett signing a $2 million book deal. She's cashing in. I still want to know who paid off Brett Kavanaugh's $1 million credit card debt, or however much it was. What the hell is going on here?
Sorry.
Well, I was going to say, and the Republican Party doesn't even use the American Bar Association anymore. They put numerous judges on federal benches for life who are rated as unqualified by the American Bar Association. Instead, they're being vetted by a religious nut, Leonard Leo, who is running this right-wing crank organization with heavy anti-abortion Catholic layering, shall we say, in it. And it's just, how can you call that anything other than political?
Exactly. And Congress has the power to limit jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. I mean, if Congress really wanted to, Congress could just say, you guys do traffic violations from now on. Obviously. But so Congress could say,
they couldn't quite go that far. They couldn't quite go that far because the Constitution, Article 3, Section 2 says that the Constitution is the final court of appeals, both as to law and to fact. But it also says that Congress shall operate under regulations and exceptions defined by, the Supreme Court shall operate under regulations and exceptions defined by Congress. And a power that Congress hasn't used in any consequential way in 240 years. And frankly, I think they should start, that was the call for action at the end of my book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court, The Betrayal of America. I really think we need to do something about it. Luke, I got to move along, but thanks. Yeah, you're welcome. And thanks for the call. It's great to hear from St. Albans, Vermont. I haven't been there in years, but it's a beautiful town. Don, Pontiac, Michigan. Hey, I've been in Pontiac, too. Hey, Don, what's up?
Hi, good to talk to you, Tom. It's snowing here in the Detroit area today.
Oh, my.
We got that going for us. You had said, what can we do to bring this country together?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we can, and I don't think we even need to try. We need to pass legislation to improve the lives of the poor and the working class. And with that and their ability to vote, we will have a long-standing majority.
It certainly worked in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s.
That's my point. That's my point. And I think
Yeah.
Biden has a possibility of it being an FDR-type president, transformational. And Obama showed us that we tried to play nice with the Republicans. They're not going to. They're going to pretend they're going to play nice, but they're not. Never going to go along.
Right.
How long did the Affordable Care Act get delayed? Because Obama was trying to get some Republican votes. Something like 180 amendments were considered by the Republicans. And at the end, how many votes did we get? Zero.
Yeah.
Zero.
Yeah, and the Republicans kept doing this old Lucy football rope-a-dope thing, you know. Oh, if you'll just tweak this a little bit, maybe we'll vote for it. Oh, just tweak that a little bit and we'll vote for it. Just, you know, and Obamacare ended up getting watered down. And then it went to the Supreme Court and John Roberts ripped the guts out of it, you know, just like he did with the Civil Rights Act, talking about politicizing the Supreme Court. You know, with the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, John Roberts said, "Oh, we don't have discrimination in the United States anymore. Racism is over. We have a black president, haven't you noticed?" And so he ripped the guts out of the Voting Rights Act, so Georgia can go back to 10-hour lines. And you know, I mean, it's just crazy. But I agree with you, Don, that if Biden can actually get things done, and to a sad extent, that's going to depend on Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin. But if Biden can get things done, I think that there is a bright future for this country and for the Democratic Party. I really, truly do. Thank you very much for the call. Randall in Minneapolis. Hey, Randall, what's up?
Oh, Tom, I was just thinking for the people that are probably thinking more like me, or at least, I go back to Kennedy and going through everything up until now. I'd like to see those papers released soon. But to keep it simple, the people that are living in fear, they can rely on their common sense. They can rely. If something comes on the line and it's separating the public. Mm-hmm. You know right there and then that's not part of the uniting of our country. Period.
Sure.
So just take it for what it's worth, and you don't have to go through. What's the guy's name in Australia that owns all these papers?
Rupert Murdoch.
And the fella that helped Trump. That has those magazines that they have at the newsstand, at the checkout.
Oh yeah,
everywhere.
David Pecker. Yeah.
Yeah. This is what they're doing now. Is it comes from the wrestling, and the same thing that they do in wrestling and on and on. And it's a big show, and people have to relax and realize that we're going to come together. That's all it is. We're coming together.
I think we're already there, Randall. The fact of the matter is the Democrats in the Senate represent 41 million more Americans than Republicans do, even though the Senate's 50-50. That you've got states like Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin where the majority of the people in the states vote for Democrats, although because of gerrymandering, they send more Republicans to Congress. But the fact of the matter is that most Americans are with us, are with Democrats on this. I am not the left. I am the radical middle. Randall, thank you.
To Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
In fact, if you go into the Internet Wayback Machines and you look at our website from back, in the early 2000s, I referred to myself and to this program as the radical middle. And welcome back. Let's see here. Mike in Simi Valley. Whoop, hang on just a second, Mike. I got to hit the right button. Mike in Simi Valley, California. You are on the air. What's up? Thanks for watching Free Speech.
Just a little bit of a rant, and I appreciate your optimism. But logic and reason has become obsolete. Stupidity has taken over.
In some quarters.
Thomas Paine, where are you? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, Thomas Paine had his own challenges. I mean, after he published The Age of Reason, his book promoting atheism, he was banned from public society. When he died, only 7 people showed up for his funeral. He was an outcast, a pariah.
However, he was still a thinker. Some of these Republicans don't think. I don't know what it is. My question is, who can cleverly speak to the media, or for that matter, the country, other than you? I mean, they need to be cleverly insulted. And I think that if the Dems stay quiet, I think we might be in trouble. But I do appreciate your optimism.
Well, I don't think the Dems are staying quiet, Mike. I think they're speaking out, and increasingly the media is actually starting to pay attention to them. I'm impressed by how frequently we're seeing Bernie Sanders on TV, you know?
I'll take it.
And Elizabeth Warren and other progressives. I mean, you know, the programs that historically were just, you know, if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Republicans, you know? They're actually starting to put progressives on rather than just corporate Democrats. And I think it's because they're experiencing the same thing that Joe Biden is. Joe Biden is a politician. His entire life, he's lifted his finger and said, which way is the wind blowing? That's not a bad thing in and of itself.
Yes.
If, you know, because you want your politicians to actually be part of the general gestalt. You want them to be promoting public policies that are popular. And what's popular now, people have figured out that the whole Reagan thing was a lie. They've figured out that the whole little government, big government is a terrible thing. We have to shrink government, that's a lie. They've figured out that you need government during times of crisis. We've been through a series of crises now in the last couple of years, from floods to hurricanes to wildfires to pandemics. And Joe Biden is putting his finger to the air and going, people want more Social Security. People want unionization. People want jobs. People want infrastructure. And he's going to give it to us. God bless him. This is exactly what we want. I'm actually very hopeful, Mike. But the one thing that concerns me is that these fascists within the Republican Party will succeed where Trump failed at ending our democracy, at further gerrymandering situations, at making it harder for people to vote. I don't think they're going to succeed over the long term. I think 20 years from now we'll look back on this period as a huge transitional time in America. But over the next couple of years, I'm very concerned.
I think that when you mention Steve Scalise, I mean, when he's talking about Maxine Waters, I mean, that's what I mean. I mean, people hear that, and they start to believe it. And I hope, I mean, believe me, listen, I'm with you 1,000%. But how can we get somebody else to like I would love to see a debate between Steve Scalise or somebody that's a Democrat that could stand up to him and just say, you know, you're not with it, period. You know. Anyway, that's all I want to say.
Somebody needs to point out that when Steve Scalise was running for Congress in Louisiana, you know, he's now the number 2 Republican in the House, but he's the congressman from Louisiana, that he claimed that he was David Duke without the baggage. That was his selling point.
I know. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Ask a boomer what it was like going to college back in the 60s and 70s and whether they had to go into debt to do it. And odds are they'll tell you that they not only didn't have to go into debt, in fact, college was free in California until Ronald Reagan became governor. Not only did they not have to go into debt, but, you know, you could pretty much work your way through college just with a part-time job. That is very much no longer the case. Only 8% of millennials and Gen Xers have never had a student loan. This is a crushing burden on these two generations, and it's time to clean it up. And when Americans were asked, what do you think? Should we just wipe the slate clean? Should we get rid of all this student debt? 60% of Americans said yes. And then, of course, the corollary to that would be, and then let's make college free, at least state colleges and community colleges. There's a whole video about this over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program. You can check it out there. Welcome back. Let's check in with Debbie Hines, our legal analyst. and former trial lawyer, former assistant attorney general for the state of Maryland, and general expert on all things legal. IamDebbieHines.com, her website, and her Twitter handle. Debbie, welcome back. So the jury is still out. What does that mean to you?
You know, Tom, I've heard all of my other colleagues talk about what that means. There's really no way to tell how long a jury is going to be out on this particular case, what the jury is doing, what's taking them so long. You know, it doesn't have the consistency that people are saying, either when I hear other attorneys say, oh, a fast verdict means that it's a guilty verdict. Well, that certainly wasn't the case with the O.J. Simpson case. That was the quickest verdict I ever heard. You can't really read the tea leaves in that. But the thing that I think that I wanted to share with your listeners, because I think it's a thing that people get confused with, because they're thinking, my God, what could be taking them so long? But they don't have to, they're not deciding what we sitting at home are deciding, whether Derek Chauvin killed George Floyd. They have to decide on the elements of the charges that the judge read to them. So meaning and they have to do it for basically 3 charges. So meaning that for the charge of second degree, they have to find that Chauvin's actions, that Chauvin committed an assault in the third degree that was a felony. That's what makes it be a second-degree murder charge. And in the instance of third degree, they have to find that it was with, reckless disregard, that he just deprived Mr. Floyd of his life, and manslaughter is negligence, culpable negligence. So they have to really go through as simple as did he kill him. It's a matter of, well, how did he kill him? Did he do it by second degree? Did he do it by third degree? Was it done by, manslaughter? And I actually thought the jury would probably 3 days. I didn't think it would be a fast turnaround, just basically because of all the elements that the judge read to them in the jury instructions that they have to methodically go through and determine those elements. I still have faith so far in the jury, because I feel elevated by the fact that it is 6 jurors of color. There are 4 black jurors and there are 2 jurors that are people of color. And so it's basically split 6 and 6. And so I just don't feel that the black jurors and the people of color are going to come back with a not guilty. I mean, I could be surprised, but I don't feel that would happen. I think that the more likely thing that could happen is a compromise verdict. But again, I always go back to 12 jurors, 12 people who don't know each other, never saw each other before. They sat in this courtroom. Complete strangers have to decide for 3 individual charges, and that could take more than a moment.
So if they come back with a not, just to game out all 3 possibilities, they come back with not guilty on all counts, they come back with guilty on all counts, or they come back with a hung jury. What happens in each one of those 3 cases?
Well, see, there's more options. The options are not that limited. They can come back with not guilty on second degree, not guilty on third degree, guilty on manslaughter. They can come back not guilty on, I mean, there's a lot of variations involved. And that's
but I guess what I'm asking is, how appealable are these things?
Well, the state doesn't have the right to appeal. It's only the defendant that has the right to appeal, and the appellate court only looks to see if the grounds that you're raising on appeal, if you're found guilty, did they, in effect, they have to be substantial error, that they caused the jury to decide in that way. We're raising things like Maxine Waters, which is they could break that, but on appeal, they would have to just cause the jury to render a guilty verdict, because if it's just something that's a little bit of a problem, it's really no style that the legal system would appeal.
Do you think the failure of the judge to sequester the jury when the defense had asked for it will be the basis of an appeal, or could be?
No.
Would be a strong basis?
No, because the other. No, with the other, he can make it be the basis of appeal, because you could say anything in your argument for the appeal, the points that you're raising. But the other standard for appeal is the judge has certain discretion. And so if the judge, that's the word that we use, if the judge has a discretion to do something, then there's no harm there unless you can say that that discretionary act that the judge did caused it because it was error. The bottom line when you're saying a judge did something wrong, you have to show that it was egregious error.
Mm.
That way, it has to be. You have to show that it was egregious error.
More, your phone is breaking up.
For the defense. Yeah.
Okay.
It gets to be the higher standard for the defendant on appeal.
I see. Interesting. Well, I was hoping that they would come back in 9 minutes and 26 seconds. But, obviously they're not.
Me too, Tom. Me too.
Yeah. Debbie Hines, our friend, trial lawyer, legal political commentator, former prosecutor, former assistant attorney general of Maryland. I am Debbie Hines, DebbieHines.com, and I am Debbie Hines on Twitter. Debbie, thank you so much for dropping by every day. I really appreciate it. Good talking with you. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code TOM. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
Guns for Hire, how the CIA and U.S. Army recruit mercenaries for white Rhodesia. It's a historical reprint of what appears to be a 1979 pamphlet, basically. This is from the introduction. It does have an ISBN number. It is available in book sources. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, actually this must have been published post-1980 because they're referencing Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, 270,000 white settlers, mostly immigrated since World War II, controlled the government and economy, ruling over the 7 million black Africans. The Zimbabweans cannot vote. They have been forced off the bulk of the arable land, and they have no democratic rights whatsoever. All labor performance in Zimbabwe is black labor, and it is intensely exploited, often at less than subsistence wages. Zimbabweans have been fighting European invaders since the early 17th century. Since the 1890s, they have been directly ruled by Europeans, at first in the form of a private British corporation, the British South Africa Company. Since 1923, direct political rule has been in the hands of the white settlers, currently led by Ian Smith and his fascist Rhodesian Front Party. It's important to note that the white settlers were originally given this direct local power as a, quote, self-governing colony of the British government, thereby creating a master-caretaker relationship. During these past 80-odd years, Western imperialism, the multinational corporations of the United States, Britain, and South Africa, has extracted huge profits from the exploited and oppressed Zimbabwean population via the subsidiaries of the Anglo-Americans, Lonrho, Amex, AMAX, Union Carbide, Mobil, ITT, and other corporations. They fully intend to continue doing so as long as they can. The white settler minority has been rewarded for their violent subjugation of the Zimbabwean people with perhaps the highest national standard of living in the world. Sir Roy Walensky, the former Prime Minister of the Central African Federation, which included what is now Rhodesia, once said, "This man Smith has an appeal. It's the appeal of an easy life. For $6,000 a year, you can have 5 servants, a swimming pool, and a lot." Beginning during the early 1960s, however, the Zimbabwean nationalist forces under the leadership of the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, evolved the strategy of guerrilla war to liberate their people and land. It is proving to be very successful. There are 20,000 guerrillas in base camps in Tanzania and Mozambique, over 3,000 in Zimbabwe itself, and this number is continually rising. In a meeting between Stephen Solars, a U.S. congressman, and the ZANU guerrilla leaders, they were reported to reject the possibility of enlisting the assistance of Cuban or other foreign troops, declaring that if we cannot liberate ourselves, we do not deserve to be liberated. Despite Western propaganda to the effect that the U.S. and British only wish to avoid a bloodshed in Rhodesia, don't forget the Zimbabweans have been bleeding for almost a century, their real fear is that the liberation struggle will win. With this victory in sight, it is not surprising that the counterattack by the Smith regime has become more vicious and brutal. Actually, this must have been published pre-1980, because this is when Smith was still in power in Rhodesia. More than 250,000 rural Zimbabweans have been forced into concentration camps. Terrorist raids have been conducted against Zimbabwean refugees in Mozambique. Dusk to dawn shoot-on-sight curfews have been instituted and enforced in the border areas. And escalating counterinsurgency attacks have been launched against the military arm of the liberation struggle, the Zimbabwean People's Army, ZIPA. It is crucial for Westerners to understand that the Smith regime has not stood alone in this barbaric campaign. This pamphlet documents the critically important element in U.S. imperialism's support for the Smith regime, white mercenary reinforcements for the fascist Rhodesian, quote, security forces. This flow of U.S. mercenaries to prop up white Rhodesia is an important, though secret, part of U.S. imperialism's strategy for Africa. The U.S. has massive investments in southern Africa. Zimbabwe alone supplies the bulk of high-grade chrome ore used in the U.S. for jet engines and other advanced technological items. Coal, copper, and other minerals are ripped out of Zimbabwe for U.S. industry. Mobil Oil, Texaco, Hertz Rent-A-Cars, Holiday Inns, and many other U.S. corporations operate illegally in Rhodesia through foreign subsidiaries. More important still is South Africa, the fortress of U.S. interests in Africa, where $1.5 billion is invested by GM, IBM, Ford, and other giant multinational corporations. The liberation of Zimbabwe would, for the first time, penetrate the buffer zone of satellite countries protecting the borders of South Africa. South African guerrilla fighters, who are already training by the thousands in camps in Tanzania and Zambia, would have direct access to re-enter their land and accelerate the liberation struggle. Knowing that the stakes are high, U.S. imperialism has worked to strengthen the white supremacist outposts in Africa, although at times this had to be done covertly. In 1970, the Nixon White House approved Henry Kissinger's Operation Tar Baby strategy, based on Option 2 of the Secret National Security Study Memorandum Number 39. This strategy essentially called for covert military assistance, including direct exchanges, so the South African troops could be trained in the U.S. in specialized tactics and weapons. This would be done while the U.S. tried to convince Africans that it was on their side. This is from the pamphlet number 39, that Kissinger memorandum. We would maintain public opposition to racial oppression, but relax political isolation and economic restrictions without openly taking a position undermining the United Kingdom and the UN on Rhodesia. We would be more flexible in our attitudes toward the Smith regime. And it goes on from there. Guns for hire.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is our old buddy Greg Palast. Today is the anniversary of the Deepwater Horizon corporate homicide. Greg, your thoughts on this? Tell us. First of all, I know you did some serious investigative work on this. Give us the background. It's been a few years.
Yeah, it's been a few years, but again, the real story hasn't come out in America. For British television and European television, I was sent to investigate, and what I found is that, we got this wonderful corporate fairy tale that on April 20th, a tragic accident that no one could have seen blew up. There was a blowout on a BP rig in the Gulf of Mexico, slimed 600 miles of coastline, and incinerated, literally vaporized 11 men on that rig. Terrible accident. Who could have figured on it? Except that I got a message from the Caspian Sea off of Baku in Azerbaijan. I've never heard of Azerbaijan. It's an oil state. You'll find out when the 101st Airborne arrives there. But that's how Americans learn geography, right? By invading oil states. But I flew to Azerbaijan because I got a insider saying that they had witnessed the blowout of a BP rig. But it wasn't in the Gulf. There was another blowout in the Caspian Sea 17 months, a year and a half before the Gulf spill. You didn't see it in any news reports. It was completely buried and covered up by the dictatorship of Azerbaijan, what I call the Islamic Republic of BP.
No, wait a second.
British Petroleum, yes. And so it was the same exact blowout. And here's the thing, Tom. So BP, yeah, go ahead. So, go ahead. You had a question. But let me just finish. So there was this BP.
Yeah, my apologies,
blowout.
Greg. There's about a 3 or 4 second
delay
latency that we have here. My understanding, my recollection at the time, there was all these news stories saying, who could have imagined? How could this have happened? Nobody. It must be some weird thing. The cement in the pipes or something. This has never happened before. Blah blah. You're saying all of that is a lie.
By the way, it's not just a lie. It was perjury before the United States Congress. So again, a year and a half before the BP blowout in the Gulf, BP had an identical blowout in the Caspian Sea, and they covered it up. They only told their partners Chevron and Exxon, and I actually flew to Azerbaijan to get this confirmed. I was put under arrest by a combination of BP's private police force and the secret police there. But then I got a confirmation of the blowout from a guy working with The Guardian who's now named Chelsea Manning. He got the inside State Department cable saying that the Bush State Department under Condoleezza Rice knew about this, as did Chevron. And by the way, you may take note that there is a tanker, super tanker, called the Condoleezza, named after Chevron's former board member, who was then Secretary of State. They completely covered it up. They didn't, which is required by law, tell the U.S. Interior Department, which told BP, do not drill in that area of the Gulf. It's unstable. So BP, Chevron, and Exxon, who knew about the blow-up in the Gulf, the disaster in the Caspian Sea, went before Congress and under oath said, we haven't had a problem in deep water drilling for 50 years, even though they were completely aware, including the Bush administration, of the blowout in the Caspian. Now, if they had known about that, there's no way that Interior would have allowed them to drill or allowed them to use the methods, this what was called the quick dry cement method used in the Caspian Sea, which was the immediate cause of the blowout. Interestingly, Chevron and Exxon secretly and quietly stopped using the quick dry method in deep water in the Gulf. BP continued because it was cheaper. Drying cement quickly is a heck of a lot cheaper than letting it dry slowly. It led to the death of 11 men, 600 miles of shoreline destroyed. And by the way, just a few weeks ago, you and I talked about the Exxon Valdez, where I was an investigator on that case. And in that case, they had, it's not rocket science to stop an oil spill. You just put rubber around the rig or the vessel, and you suck it out with the oil out with a skimmer ship. They didn't have it around the Exxon Valdez, even though they promised. The same darn thing happened in the Gulf, Tom. BP promised to have all this rubber boom and these skimmer ships. They were supposed to have this controlled and get the equipment out there in 4 hours. They took 4 days. They took 4 days. So they knew about, they lied to Congress. Chevron, BP, Exxon all lied to Congress saying it was safe to drill in the Gulf. Interior was overruled. They did the drilling using an unsafe method. 11 people died. And how many people died from the cancers from the hydrocarbons that hit the beach? You had people out there in flip-flops picking up oil. When I was in Alaska, you didn't do that unless you had on hazmat suits. It was horrendous. It's horrendous what happened. This is corporate homicide. It's not an accident.
Yeah.
You know, and the Bush administration
Greg,
knew.
is anybody going to be held to account for this? Has anybody been held to account for this?
Well, I will say that the guy that lied to Congress was, in fact, charged with fraud and perjury from BP, and, of course, skipped out. They said, they had excuses. Nice loopholes of the law and the best lawyers. No one was held accountable. BP, basically, you have to understand it costs billions to run these oil containment operations around the world. It's just a lot cheaper to pay off widows, pay off cleanup workers who in the Gulf were getting minimum wage, and without having to spend the billions to prevent the killings and disaster in the first place. And that's the problem. We still have this problem today, even after the Deepwater Horizon. More promises from the oil companies. Where is the equipment? We're not prepared for another disaster. Not at all.
Are you seeing any evidence that John Kerry, the energy czar now, or the climate change czar, I guess, or other members of the Biden administration are taking this kind of stuff seriously and are intending to hold? Obviously, Trump was not going to hold anybody accountable, especially as long as they were pouring campaign money into his coffers. What about the Biden administration?
Well, I'm very concerned, especially about drilling in the Arctic Ocean. But I think that the Biden administration is just trying to say we're done with oil, so we don't need to open up the Arctic to drilling, where that you can't control an oil spill. Shell Oil lost 2 rigs up there in the Arctic already, and they weren't even. Thank God they weren't drilling. That's a very dangerous spot to drill. The Gulf is still a danger, and we still have a disaster in the Gulf. There was a game by BP that nature is like some type of toilet that flushes itself out. I can tell you right now, when I was on the beaches in the Gulf of Mexico, you had cleanup workers who were told, don't go more than a 1/4 inch below the surface of the sand. Just pick up the crap on the top so that the cameras don't see the oil that's oozing about 8 inches below the surface. So while the camera crews are concentrating on these nice, clean beaches, there's literally chunks of oil that are big as sofas floating nearby. I think Biden and Kerry, in a way, have the right idea. You can't control these oil companies, so you move beyond oil. It's time to not be a prisoner of these oil companies. And don't forget, it's political capture, too. It's not just, it's political pollution. In the case of the United States, the bribery with small stuff, a sexual favors plus Super Bowl tickets got the regulators off BP's case. In Azerbaijan, in order to cover up the crimes there, it was $30 million checks to the dictatorship.
Absolutely amazing. The great Greg Palast, investigative journalist, author, his latest How Trump Stole 2020, gregpalast.com, Greg_Palast over on Twitter. Greg, thanks so much for dropping by. It's always great having you with us. Thank you.
Best, Tom. Bye.
Thank you. Back at you. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's 15 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, picking up your phone calls with our last more or less anything goes hour. Stick around. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And we've got a story about red meat that I'm going to get to in just a moment, which I think is a pretty damn good one. Meanwhile, the Oklahoma legislature has just passed a bill that legalizes murdering protesters with cars. Not making this up. This is from the Associated Press, not the World Communist League, the Associated Press. The state Senate voted 38-10, mostly along party lines, for a bill that now heads to the governor's desk. The measure is one of a series of GOP-backed proposals that would increase criminal penalties for activities associated with protests over racial injustice and police brutality. Specifically, the bill would make it a misdemeanor punishable by up to a year in jail and a $5,000 fine for anyone who blocks the use of a public street. Remember that part about the First Amendment, the right of the people to peaceably assemble and protest or petition their government for redress of grievance? That's the phrase from the First Amendment. Yeah, well, so much for that. The measure would also, but now here's where it gets really bizarre. The measure would also grant a motorist criminal and civil immunity if they kill or injure someone while they are fleeing from a, quote, riot. From a riot? What is, fleeing from a riot. Oh, yeah. Well, all you have to do to decide that it's a riot is to have the police declare it a riot. And if it's a bunch of people who are protesting police violence, surprise, surprise, it's going to be a riot. It's going to be considered a riot. It's going to be called a riot. Rob Standridge, a Republican from Norman, Oklahoma, who wrote the bill, said it was prompted mostly by an incident in Tulsa last summer in which a pickup truck drove through a crowd gathered on a Tulsa interstate while protesting the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. Several people were injured, including one who was paralyzed from the waist down after falling from an overpass. But the driver, whose family was in the car, was not charged. So the driver drives into the crowd, pushes one guy over the edge of the overpass. He's paralyzed from the waist down for the rest of his life. And the response by this Republican who sponsored this legislation that has just passed the state Senate in Oklahoma, 38-10, was to say, we're not going to prosecute people who do that. No, not going to happen. In fact, he goes on to say, the kids cowered in the back seat because they feared for their lives. That's what this bill is all about. So those protesters made them fear for their lives. The protesters who got hit with the truck, the protesters who got run over, the protesters who one of whom got pushed right up to the edge of an overpass and flipped over the bridge and broke his back. Those were the protesters who were so scary that the kids in the back seat feared for their lives, and therefore Daddy had to kill some try to kill some protesters. Amazing. It's absolutely amazing. Anyhow, we'll be back. I've got an amazing story to tell you about red meat and heart disease, and then we'll pick up your phone calls. Stick around. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So the Republican Party has sold themselves all the way back to the 60s, really, as the serious party. We're the party of issues. We take stuff seriously. We have serious policy analysis. We have serious constitutional analysis. We are serious about the economy. We have all these think tanks, Heritage and Competitive Enterprise and Cato, and we've got the Federalist Society finding serious judges that we can put on the federal bench, and in response to 4 dead Americans, they got real serious. 5 House committees, 2 Senate committees. They created a separate House Select Committee for 4 dead Americans. That was Benghazi. Thousands of hours of testimony. The Secretary of State testifying for 8 hours straight. But when 5 people die at the Capitol, not so much. Got a new video about it over at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. A little geeky science for you for the day. This is a study of 20,000 individuals. It was a good, solid study. It was published in a journal called Preventative Cardiology at the Scientific Congress of the European Society of Cardiology, heart medicine. And what they found, first of all, they measured three types of, they used three different ways of measuring heart function, how well your heart is doing. First, cardiovascular magnetic resonance, CMR, which assesses the function of the heart. It's sort of like an MRI, only specific to the heart. So it's looking at the soft tissue, at the muscles and things, and the inside of the arteries and veins. Second, they used a technique called novel CMR radiomics, or radiomics, excuse me, which is used to extract detailed information from heart images such as shape and texture. And the third thing they measured was the elasticity of blood vessels. The elasticity of blood vessels determines the variability of your blood pressure, the ability of your body to respond to demands for higher blood pressure, like, as a consequence of exercise, or to downregulate as a consequence of, for example, relaxing or meditating or sleeping. And they also adjusted, by the way, they looked at a whole bunch of variables: age, gender, deprivation, education, smoking, alcohol, exercise, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, and body mass index as a measure of obesity. So they took all of those variables and basically sorted them out, filtered them out. If you have one obese person in the control group, you have one obese person in the non-control group, for example. So it doesn't matter, right? So all you're measuring is heart. That's all they're looking at. And this study was published over at ScienceDaily.com. And just to give credit, because I'm going to quote a sentence or two, the researchers found that greater intake of red meat was associated with worse imaging measures of heart health across all measures studied. Specifically, individuals with higher meat intake had smaller ventricles, poorer heart function, and stiffer arteries, all markers of worse cardiovascular health. Now, they compared this. I've told you for years that I became a vegetarian when I was 16, and then maybe, 15 years ago or so, I started eating fish occasionally, and then I stopped eating fish for a year or so, and then maybe, 6-8 months ago, Louise and I started eating fish maybe once a month. We will try to eat oily fish occasionally. I'm just following my body essentially. So I'm a vegan who eats fish. I don't eat dairy products. So anyhow, the researchers found greater intake of red and processed meat was associated with the worst imaging across all measures studied. Meat intake had smaller ventricles, poorer heart function, stiffer arteries, all markers of cardiovascular health. As a comparison, the researchers also tested the relationship between heart imaging measures and intake of oily fish, which has previously been linked with better heart health. They found that as the amount of oily fish consumption rose, heart function improved and arteries were stretchier. Interesting. Very interesting. Apparently my body is telling me good stuff. They go on to say, this is one of the researchers, Dr. Razi Estabra, says, for example, it's possible that greater red meat intake leads to raised blood cholesterol, and this in turn causes heart disease. Our study suggests that these four factors do play a role in the links between meat intake and heart health, but don't apply to fish. She noted, quote, there is some evidence that red meat alters the gut microbiome, leading to higher levels of certain metabolites in the blood, which have been linked to greater risk of heart disease. And I think this is just absolutely fascinating. You want to read the whole thing? The European Society of Cardiology is where it is published, and you can get the entire study there. But I mean, this just comes on the heel. I remember back in the back in the 70s. When Louise and I were just like, crusaders for vegetarianism. And a friend of ours owned a restaurant, and his father got heart disease and was literally dying of heart disease. And his father was in his 60s. And when we were all in our 30s at the time. And he took his father out to Nathan Pritigan's place, where they put him on basically a vegan diet. And his father's heart disease reversed. And his father lived for another, decade and a half, just fine, thank you very much. Just never again ate meat or dairy. And, I've seen this with my own eyes over and over and over again. Anyhow, I'll be picking up your phone calls on the other side of this break. I'm going to just reconnect to our studio so we'll get rid of our latency problem here. And so we'll be right back with your thoughts on whatever's on your mind right after this. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your calls in just a moment. Stick around. We'll be right back. This camera, right? 3. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Minority Leader, How to Lead from the Outside and Make Real Change by Stacey Abrams. This is from chapter 1, although the introduction is fascinating too, where she talks about, Rhodes scholarships and stuff, but this is chapter 1. I sit in a living room, a cozy space, warm in the early summer. I'm perched on the edge of a sofa next to Valerie, the home's owner, a lovely black woman in her late 40s. Across from us, seated close together on a wide settee meant for one, are her 2 children, a son and a daughter. Politicians rarely visit their streets, which are nestled in a poorer community in South Georgia. Valerie beams with pride that both her children are headed to college in the fall. David, 17, plans to study criminology. Maya, 18, her belly round with her first child, intends to become a middle school teacher. Both newly graduated from high school, Maya will give birth in mere weeks and begin college months later, an unwed teen mother. Her intended school is more than 3 hours north of her home, so her mother will raise her newborn baby while she starts her freshman year. Valerie speaks matter-of-factly about the coming challenge, raising a new child just as hers leaves the nest. Still, she is determined that both her children pursue college degrees that she never received. Maya, the mother-to-be, wonders how she'll do so far away from home and her baby. Yet in the next breath, she explains how college will be the best for her and her child. Their future success rests upon her. I've come to their home as part of my campaign for governor, so I asked Valerie what she expects of someone like me. What can I do to help make lives like hers better? In her soft voice, she replies, she just wants options for financial aid for her children. They will succeed, she says, if they can afford to stay in school. As I look around the modest home passed down through the generations, I understand both the pride and the desperation tangled in her response. She got them through and has given them the tools to carve out better lives for themselves. We chat more about the worries she has lived with all those years, our discussion turning to the crime and poverty in their neighborhood. Then I ask Valerie what she wants. At first, all I get in response is a quizzical look to suggest I need to reconsider my bid for higher office. Or that suggests. I repeat, what do you want for you? What secret dream do you have for yourself? Her confused expression turns to one of surprise. I don't know, she tells me. I've been a cashier at the Piggly Wiggly for 20 years. You must want something, I probe, something you'd like to do for you. A daycare, she admits quietly. I'd like to start a daycare center for unwed mothers like my daughter, so more girls can finish school and pursue their dreams. But that ambition is beyond her. Her body language, her tone of voice, her averted gaze speak louder than her words. I press her, but she demurs with a smile. Let's just see what happens if you win the governor's job, she says. Valerie's house in South Georgia is not too different from the squat red brick house where I grew up on South Street in Gulfport, Mississippi. An oak tree grew out in our front yard, shadowing the front sidewalk, forbidding grass to grow beneath its shade. Pink azaleas bloomed each spring from bushes that flanked the front door. Our rented house and the others set close by teemed with children, all black, all working class. We played in our postage-stamped yards,
make believing the fantastical, superhero exploits, cops and robbers. As we got older, we'd talk about moving to New Orleans or living in one of the mansions along the beachfront that lay less than 5 miles away, across the railroad tracks that ran in between our neighborhood and the more wealthy environs. We dreamed of more, while our parents' lives centered around survival and making it from paycheck to paycheck. Instinctively, we understood that more had to be possible, even if we didn't know what to do to get there. These imaginings, these desires, are the roots of ambition. As adults, like Valerie, we tend to edit our desires until they fit our construction of who we're supposed to become. In such a world, I wouldn't dare dream of running for higher office, for mayor or governor or president. At least for now, Valerie sees herself retiring in 20 more years from Piggly Wiggly as a cashier, rather than as a small business owner who helps the community raise its children. From our brief meeting, I could see she had the fire, albeit of a low burn, of a minority leader. She had ambition, she had vision, but she didn't have the faith, and understandably so. Whether we come from working class neighborhoods or grow up comfortably middle class, minorities rarely come of age explicitly thinking about what we want and how to get it. People already in power almost never have to think about whether they belong in the room, much less if they would be listened to once outside. These men, and they are usually men and typically white, do not have to grapple with low expectations based on gender or race or class. Ambition for them begins with reminiscences of old times and older friendships or newer alliances. The ends have already been decided. Only the means are to be discussed. Most potential minority leaders feel the same lack of faith Valerie had, at least at some point in their evolution. We may not know how to get the first job, let alone make it to the big chair. We don't know how to take the leap from accepting our fates to actually changing them, and not just a little, but radically. Then there are those who simply don't know what they want. The drive to achieve burns inside, often without a clear target. We want to be something, but what that is remains hazy. Often we cannot articulate our goals because they lie just beyond the reach of who we're supposed to be. Ambition's scale is irrelevant. What holds us back is not scope, it's fear. And because we don't know what to call our dreams, don't know how to make them happen, or are pretty sure we'll be disappointed, we just stand still. We become a minority, but becoming a minority leader demands that we embrace ambition as our due. Stacey Abrams.
Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Alan Dershowitz, that great legal mind and, friend of Donald Trump and his little buddy Jeffrey. Alan Dershowitz says that Maxine Waters is doing the same thing as the Klan. Right. Yeah, the Klan. Yeah, Maxine Waters. He really said that. He said her actions are similar to intimidation efforts of the Klan toward juries in the 50s and 60s. Tucker Carlson said that, what Maxine Waters said was, if Chauvin gets off, that people in Minneapolis need to speak out. And they will. She is not advocating violence. She obviously is not advocating violence, never has. But Tucker Carlson says that what she is saying is, do what we say or we'll kill you. Right. This at the same time that the city is now mourning the death of Daunte Wright, another black man, in this case almost a child murdered by the police. It is just remarkable. It's not the way that the justice system should work. But it is the way that it has worked forever, so. Anyhow, picking up your phone calls, Alfredo in Mountain View, California. Hey, Alfredo, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I hope your shoulder is feeling better.
Yeah, slowly it is. Yeah, thank you.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah. I have been vegan for 36 plus years, and you were talking about red meat. Just blaming red meat and discounting all the other animal meats or animal products out there, I think is a big mistake. For example, a piece of breast of chicken has the same amount of cholesterol than a piece of red meat. And dairy products as well as very harmful. I don't know if you know Dr. Cadwell Esselstyn. He is an authority on reversing heart disease with plant-based diets, without surgery, without drugs. As a matter of fact, he was one of the physicians who helped former President Bill Clinton to reverse his heart disease with plant-based diets. And Bill Clinton,
plant-based diets absolutely work to do that. I had a dear friend of mine, Earl Katz, reversed his heart disease that way. My friend Tom Larson, his father, reversed his heart disease. That was back 40 years ago at the Pritigan Clinic. I've seen it over and over again. I am convinced, in fact, that dairy products are even worse than meat, and meat is pretty awful stuff. I think the one exception to that, and maybe this is just, my dad's father was a Norwegian immigrant, and so we always had basically Norwegian food kicking around the house, and a lot of that was kippered herring and these basically small oily fish. And so I grew up eating that stuff, and that my wife thinks just tastes totally creepy, anchovies and things. And I think that's the exception to it. But when I say that I eat fish, I'm talking about 1 ounce every 2 weeks. It's not like every meal.
You have to be careful with fish because the studies that I have read, and you can look them up, and there is an organization called Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, or PCRM.org. And the studies that they have, they show that eating fish also elevates your cholesterol. And so the so-called benefits of the oil in fish are actually, they're not very well studied. And they have demonstrated that they do elevate your cholesterol, so I will watch out for that as well.
Yeah, and that may be the function of it just being a high-protein food, and high-protein foods tend to be inflammatory, and cholesterol is a response to inflammation. But I am not a nutritionist. I am just somebody who's been obsessed with how I eat ever since I was a teenager, and so that's all I can say. But Alfredo, you are absolutely right. For anybody who has any kind of concern about their heart, of course, talk to your doctor first. But the movie. There's a documentary out called Forks Over Knives that just lays this stuff out.
Movie.
And
it's an excellent movie. Yes,
it is absolutely brilliant. Alfredo, I got to move along, but thank you for the call, and thank you for your thank you for contributing to the conversation. Lawrence in St. Paul, Minnesota. Hey, Lawrence, what's up? Lawrence? I think Lawrence hit his mute button. Oh yeah, there you go, Lawrence. What's up?
Yep. The Maxine Waters, what she said. I'm amazed, and you see in front of you there what I'm going to say here, which is, and I'm sorry I had to use the term, but white people they kill us with impunity. They lynch us. They segregate us. And now they want to tell us what to think, what to say, how to say it, and when to say it. No, my friend, it's not going to happen. I support what Maxine Waters said, and
me too.
There's no two ways about it here. And if the Democrats are so weak that we're afraid of what the Republicans are going to say, as a matter of fact, Tom, I'm getting kind of tired of this. I listen to MSNBC, the Obamas. They just drive me nuts. They can't go 5 minutes without saying, we need bipartisanship. The same thing with Joe Biden. Oh, and I was listening to your show. And thanks for giving credit to Joe Biden. You think he's playing the long game. I do not, sir. He thinks that there's going to be bipartisanship between him and the Republican Party. Just like he's listening
well, then
to
he's
Obama.
Living in a fantasy world, Lawrence. And I don't think he's living in a fantasy world. And I think he's got some really good advisors with him. And, I'm far more hopeful. With regard to Maxine Waters, I have not heard a Democrat condemn her. It's all over Fox News. It's all over the right-wing media. Oh, my God, they're on their fainting couches. But I think that, what she said is a reasonable thing. If Derek Chauvin gets off, I'm going to be outraged. I mean, every American should be outraged. We watched a murder. In fact, I would go farther than that. I would say we watched a lynching. A lynching is a murder, a racialized murder for the purpose of creating terror in the neighborhood. And that's exactly what Chauvin and his buddies were doing to George Floyd. They murdered him publicly, and then after he was dead, they continued to stand on his body for 3 minutes as a way of saying to the community, we have the power of life and death, and y'all don't. And we just need to call it out for what it is, Lawrence.
And I believe you're correct. And whatever this verdict may be, I want all of your listeners to realize this. The black person's fight is not against the white person. It is against racism. Let's not forget that.
Yeah. And yes, and not wanting to sound too Sesame Street-ish about it, but we do all have to live together, and we all can, and it'll make America a better country if we start to, if we do. It's a good thing to have harmony. Again, it sounds so corny to say, but it's a good thing. No,
not really. Hey, one
I see Steve Scalise is on CNN right now ranting about Maxine Waters. Steve Scalise, the guy who claims that he is David Duke without the baggage, right? David Duke without the hood is the guy that CNN is putting on to comment about Maxine Waters. It's just, it's just disgusting. Lawrence, I got to move along, but thank you. Your points are so well made. Brian in Champaign, Illinois. Hey, Brian, what's up?
Yeah, as for, I can't remember the guest you had talking about the BPM
Greg Palast?
Horizon. Yes.
Yeah.
My son went to school, University of Knoxville, and one of his class projects was to study that accident. And he was telling me BP Amoco should have been way more in trouble because they were using inferior mud for that type of a project, and they knew about it. And I told him, I said, well, that's what you got to be careful about when you go into the private sector, because quite a few people know about that, and if the lawsuit comes along, they may throw you under the bus to protect themselves. And you have to make a choice. Do you want to be a whistleblower or move on to another job? That's what you got to be careful of.
Well, here's the gotcha. Remember a couple of years ago when the Republicans proposed their criminal justice reform, and the whole selling point was 2,000 or 3,000 federal people who are in jail for federal crimes, mostly non-violent crimes, mostly drug crimes, will be released. And that was the big selling point. And you had Democrats signing on to this criminal justice reform along with the Republicans. The core of that was promoted by the Koch brothers. That was Charles Koch was, gung-ho for this thing. The core of that was this thing called mens rea, which is Latin for state of mind. And now, under the new law, if the CEO of the BP Aramco or whoever it may be, if the CEO makes a decision that causes people to die, and you cannot prove that CEO actually wanted those people to die, you can no longer use the negligence. You can no longer charge them with negligence. You can no longer charge them with third-degree murder. You have to prove mens rea. That's so-called criminal justice reform. It's terrible.
To Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And frankly, we need to reverse that part of it because it was a get-out-of-jail-free card for CEOs. That's all it was. We'll be back. And welcome back. Tony in Watsonville, California. Hey, Tony, what's on your mind today?
Salutations, Mr. Hartmann. Thanks for taking my call. I just got a quick one. Is there a way to track shooting people in the country? What I'm getting at is what are your odds of getting shot? What are your odds of getting murdered compared to what are your odds of getting a blood clot with this shot from Johnson & Johnson? So when the Republicans say, "Hey, I ain't taking that shot. I could get this." Well, you're 4 times more likely to get shot with a gun than you are to get hurt with this vaccine, and it'll help the economy. And I know you guys are worried about guns and gays. So this is your platform. What are you going to do about it? Thank you.
Yeah, I think the number last year was 38,000 gun homicides, gun deaths. I'm not sure that includes suicides. I know the year that my book on guns was published, Norman Lear put a blurb on gave us a blurb for the first front cover that said 45,000 is, 45,000 dead Americans. There's 45,000 reasons to read this book. So that may have included the suicides. But let's just be very, very conservative and say it's 36,000 versus 6 blood clots, 1 death, 1 hospitalization. Now, I think you can do the math on that.
You're not even counting the injuries. You're just counting the murders, the deaths.
That's correct.
Usually in war, 6 to 1 per death. So if we can go with 36 times 6 for injuries. So that I would think
it is.
If someone could do math, they could figure out it's a lot more chances of getting hit or hurt by a weapon than by that vaccine.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
If we have these kind of talking points. Excuse me.
No, it's fine. Finish your thought.
No, if we had these talking points and the way the Republican Party seems to work, they know what they're going to say before you say anything. They have 3 or 4 answers to your wherever you're going to head to, and the Republicans always advance those talking points, and the Democrats just sit there looking like they don't know what they're talking about, even though they're trying to help the people, and the average person knows that. But the way they portray it, they're so well informed in how they're figuring how to save America, and they're killing America, and they're helping just the super wealthy, and the workers are the ones who are doing everything. Not that they do everything; they just put a lot into they're giving as much as they can, and not getting near as much return, and their life is way more endangered than a wealthier person. So how much do they have to give to lose? We lose more, We don't want more.
Yeah.
We just want to share, and we don't want to lose as much. Well, like our life.
Yeah, I think the number is that the top 1% of Americans on average live 10 years longer than the bottom 50% of Americans. It's either that or a number very, very close to that. You're absolutely right. And what Republicans are interested in doing is performing. They want, they obviously want their tax cuts, they want their deregulation, they want their profits. But in the political sphere, they perform, and so they practice their performance, and they get their performance down. Democrats, on the other hand, are interested in governing, and so they come up with policy, and they try to talk about policy, which can seem very wonky. But Tony is spot on. Tony, thank you for the call. Coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Hey, we have a new video out about the 1776 Commission. Remember this commission that Donald Trump put together to explain the history of America, to have true principles, because history is being distorted by things like the New York Times 1619 report, No, seriously, this is what Donald Trump said, that, we're engaging now in revisionist history by highlighting the history of slavery in the United States. And so he put together this bizarre commission, and now in the state of South Carolina, Senator Dwight Loftus and others have introduced legislation requiring that Trump's commission, which had no historians on it, 18 people, not a single historian, that commission's findings be taught as history in the public schools in South Carolina. It's absolutely mind-boggling. I mean, it's like they want to take us back to the 1930s. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. 34 seconds after the hour, 51 minutes past the hour. And picking up your phone calls, let's see here. Steve in Gainesville says you disagree with me, Steve, so you go to the front of the line. What's your disagreement?
Tom, I want to ask you a question. Being of sound mind, sound body, I wonder if a criminal is in the eye of a police officer, and that police officer feels threatened. If that person is on probation or has maybe a warrant out for their arrest, and that person tries to flee or hurt the officer, what would you have that officer do?
Steve, why the hypothetical? What's the point you're trying to make?
Well, you go on and on about everybody that is either conservative or Republican is bad, and we have all these notions about us that we're racist and we're anti-freedom, and we want to rewrite history and all this stuff. But
Steve, your phone is breaking up. What's the point you're trying to make?
I'm saying there's two sides to every story, and you will only give one side.
Okay, so give the other side, Steve. What am I missing here?
Okay, if a criminal shoots a police officer, why shouldn't they be given probation or given bail? Why should we just turn them free again?
I would not think that a criminal who has shot a police officer should be turned free. I don't think anybody who shoots anybody should be turned free. Steve, you're trying to create a cartoon character here, straw man, and nobody is going to take that seriously, Steve.
My friend.
Steve, your phone has just totally croaked. I'm sorry. I'd be glad to have a conversation with you sometime, but we've got to be able to hear each other. Michelle in Denver. Hey, Michelle, what's up?
So first of all, that guy, the black officer, got convicted. So why is the black officer getting convicted? Any black officer that would do this would face criminal charges. Wait a second.
What are you talking about, Michelle?
They don't.
Are you talking?
What the caller just said about officers being able to shoot criminals, the black officer that did this to a white woman was convicted. So why is he only being convicted and nobody else is? Secondly, what comes next after this? Because we've been fighting this battle for over 200 years now, and every time we take 5 steps forward, it's 10 steps back. We finally got a black president, so we got white-lashed. We got Warnock and Ossoff in there, we got white-lashed. So to me, I don't think this is going to solve much. I want Chauvin to be convicted, but it's just going to piss the KKK and white supremacy groups off. And they're going to work day and night to reverse this decision, and then they're going to take it out on us. And anybody else that's supporting Black Lives Matter or black people in general are going to pay the cost too. So to me, what needs to happen is an honest conversation about who founded this country, and it was not founded by white people. They came over on a boat just like my ancestors did. They don't own rights to this country. They took it from the Indians and enslaved black people to work it. So if black people are 400 and some years tired, sick and tired of having to fight this battle and break a window that they helped build the foundation of that money these people have, then I'm not going to be pissed off. What's going to happen if he does not get convicted is going to be just that. It's going to be 10 times worse than Rodney King, because rather than this country facing facts and telling these dumb people who are racist as hell off a belief, a Civil War belief that's inherently incorrect, instead of telling them the truth, they keep lying to them, and we keep letting it happen. So we need to start from the basics, literally start from the basics, because they didn't found this country. The Indians founded America. They were here before us. And you took everything from them. You pillaged them just like you're pillaging black people. And if the black officer can be convicted of shooting a white woman, then a white officer needs to be convicted of shooting a black man who is unarmed and innocent and not proven guilty in a court of law, not a criminal.
Amen. Michelle, thank you. Thank you. Very well said. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. Seriously. It's the demos in democracy. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and the people around you, huh? We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code TOM. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!